raise costs on everything across the board and would throw devastation into our economy. Look at the stock market. It goes down when Trump's serious about tariffs, and it goes up when he says, well, maybe he's not so serious. And with the chaos that is caused, so businesses, which love certainty, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, need certainty. So my questions are these. Does the great senator and great Giants fan from New Jersey agree that prices could go way up, all the way up to as much as $6,000? And does he agree that the chaos from Trump's tariffs is discombobulating the economy in very serious ways? And again, does he agree that the reason that they seem to be doing this, they count the revenues? This guy Navarro seems to have no sense of reality, and yet he seems to be in charge. And they count the revenues to help them get more tax cuts for the wealthy. Almost everything they do, including tariffs, it seems to me, is aimed at getting those tax cuts for the wealthy, which, God bless the wealthy, as I've heard you say last night when we spoke. We're not against people who make a lot of money. God bless them, but they don't need a tax break.
No, they don't.
They should realize the beauty of America helped them become or stay billionaires. The money we invested in education, in roads, in schools, in helping kids get food makes a better workforce. So my question to my colleague on these tariffs, A, does he agree that it could raise the price on an average family thousands of dollars? It's estimated $6,000. Does he agree that the chaos caused by Trump's on again, off again, this country, this much, that much, this product, that product, is hurting the economy and hurting business people do their jobs? And does he agree that it seems the motivation is tax breaks for the wealthiest people?
So
Could you please answer my question?
I will,
yield
Leader
back
Schumer.
to him.
I will. So you and I both know that in 72 days now, it's the next day, the 72 days that Trump has been in office, he has caused havoc on the American economy, especially given the economy he inherited. Inflation is up. Prices are up. Consumer confidence is down. The stock market and people's 401ks and retirement plans are down. He continues to do things to rattle confidence, to raise prices, and to hurt not the billionaires, the people that can afford these things, to hurt average Americans who find housing prices too high and it's difficult to make ends meet. Every time, and I've looked at the tariffs throughout history, in fact, one of my friends sent me this really funny clip I hope somebody will put up for me from, I think it was Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where he was talking about tariffs and was like, Bueller, the reality is, or maybe it was another movie, I'm mixing it up, it shows my pop, what's that?
Entitled after
Thank you.
15
Right
hours.
now, but the tariffs haven't worked out for Republican presidents who tried them during the Depression. The evidence is here. Learn from our history.
Does my colleague remember the names of Smoot and Hawley?
Smoot and Hawley. Yes, sir. I definitely remember those names from high school history. God bless you, Mr. Al Gore and Ms. Saru. So yes, what he's going to do tomorrow is going to rattle the markets. What he's going to do tomorrow is raise prices for Americans. What he's going to do tomorrow is lie to folks and say that this is something that China will pay or whomever will pay, when actually it's the American consumers that will pay with higher prices and more economic insecurity. This man, I tell you this quote that Frederick Douglass once said. This I do remember. He said, "The limits of tyranny is prescribed by the endurance of those who are oppressed." How much more will we take of this? How much more will we as America say, cut our Medicaid to give tax cuts to the billionaires? Take the Affordable Care Act and take away tax credits, take away enrollment support. Hey, come after Social Security, cut thousands of people, make customer service get worse, as said the Wall Street Journal. How much more of these indignities will we take as he turns our back on our allies? How much more? How much more of a person that is doing tyrannical things as he takes our Constitution and continues to trash it as he's running into judge after judge after judge that's trying to stop him, but we've already seen that he wants to ignore judges, or if he gets real rulings he doesn't like, he trashes the judges, and even the Chief Justice appointed by a Republican says to him, no, no, this is not right, this is not who we are, this is not how we do things in America. How much more can we endure before we, in a collective chorus of conviction in our country, say enough is enough? Enough is enough. You're not going to get away with this.
I thank the gentleman for his fortitude, his strength, and the crystalline brilliance by which he has shown the American people the huge dangers that face them with this Trump, Doge, Musk administration. I yield the floor back to my colleague in New Jersey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Massachusetts, but I think you have to ask him for a question.
Mr. President, will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you. I am very grateful to the senator from New Jersey for coming to the floor for such an extended period of time to give voice to all of those around this country whose voices evidently are not heard by the Republicans in the United States Congress. And I wanted to ask a question for the 73 million people who are beneficiaries of the Social Security system and for their families, for the people whose grandma is getting Social Security, for the people whose cousin, whose dad died, who is getting Social Security benefits, about what's happening right now between Donald Trump and Elon Musk, our current co-presidents, and what they're trying to do to the Social Security system. So I start this question with just a basic observation. Social Security is not charity. It is not something we give away to those who are less fortunate, and we do this out of the goodness of our hearts. Social Security is a contract that people who work in America pay into the system for all of their working lives, and when the time comes that they retire or something happens to them and they are not able to do that work, that they can count on the Social Security system and the payments that they are legally entitled to. I want to underscore here, legally. Now, if America wanted to change that contract, the place they have to go is right here, to Congress. Yes. They have to come to the United States Senate, or they have to go to the House of Representatives, and they have to say, we actually want to change benefits for Social Security recipients. And by the way, that has happened dozens and dozens of times in our history, up through the late 1980s, where we made adjustments in the Social Security benefits. For example, for the fact that people lived longer, for the fact that people worked longer. And so we made minor adjustments in the system. We also made adjustments to make sure that there were cost of living changes in how much Social Security would pay out. So anyone who wants to change the benefits that people are legally entitled to has to come here to Congress and make that happen. But it appears that Elon Musk and Donald Trump have tried to figure out an end run. And the end run is to say, okay, we can't directly change benefits, but what we can do is we can effectively cut off benefits. Now, how can they do that? Well, one way is fire all the people who help people get their Social Security benefits. And think of it this way. Someone who wants to collect Social Security, let's just say at age 66, they decide, okay, I'm ready. It's time for me to retire. I can't do this anymore. I want to collect my Social Security benefits. And they try to fill out the form. Turns out it gets rejected. There's a number off somewhere in the system. Somebody's got a confusion over what the name is or where somebody worked, or an employer from decades back failed to fill out the right form. So now there's a problem in the system. So what does the person do? Well, first they might try calling. But if you fired the people who answered the phones, that's not going to work. Okay, so what's the next thing you do? You go to your local Social Security office. Oh, but if they've closed the Social Security office near you, that's not going to work. So what do? You go to the Social Security office that you can find. 2 hours away, 3 hours away, 4 hours away. Finally, get to that Social Security office, and when you get there, if they fired most of the people, you may encounter, what, 2 people working the desk to help straighten out problems, and a line that's 50 people long. By the way, these come from real stories. People are telling what's happening out there. So, by the time the day is over, our example here hasn't even made it to the front of the line. So, doesn't get the question answered, doesn't get the problem resolved. Has to go back home again, has to find somebody who can maybe take him to the Social Security office that's hours away and start this process over and over and over. If this person, let's just say, for example, takes 3 months to get this problem ultimately resolved by the Social Security Administration, they don't get the money. That money is lost. It just simply is gone. They do not get the money they are legally entitled to, and they have no right to go back and collect it, even pointing out that it was Social Security's error. So failure to correct these errors or to give people an opportunity to correct these errors is effectively the same as having cut their benefits. And you do that for 1% of the people, drive up your error rate. You do that for 5% of the people. You do that for 10% of the folks who are getting Social Security. And man, those cuts really start to add up. They really start to add up for the people whose benefits are cut. They really start to add up for Donald Trump and for Elon Musk. But let's look at another possibility here, and that is just simply delay. Checks don't go out on time. When checks don't go out on time, then the promise that people relied on, that check would come on the 3rd of the month, that's what they count on for rent, that's what they count on to put groceries on the table, that's what they count on to support themselves, it's gone. So maybe they'll get the check next month. Another billionaire Republican, Howard Lutnick, said, don't worry about it. His mother-in-law would simply count on the fact that they'd straighten the problem out, and maybe next month she would get her payment. I suppose if your son-in-law is a billionaire, you can count on the fact that somebody will make sure your rent gets covered and groceries on the table. But for the 70 million Americans relying on that check coming in every month, not so clear what you're going to do. So what do you do? Do you borrow money to make rent? Do you call on relatives if you've got them? Who do you go to be able to make it to the end of this month, and if the problem persists, to the next month and the next month? Where do you go? That is, in my view, as much a benefit cut as Congress having voted to say we're just going to give a 10% across-the-board cut to everyone who receives Social Security benefits. There are a lot of ways to cut benefits, and breaking your promise to 73 million Americans is a benefit cut. It is not a legal benefit cut, but it is an effective benefit cut. And I admire the senator from New Jersey for being here today to speak out for those Americans who face these kinds of cuts and have no recourse. I admire him for standing up and saying to the Republicans who won't go do town halls, who won't go out and meet with these people and listen to them, listen to their concerns, listen to their fears, listen to their stories about what happens as thousands and thousands more Social Security employees are fired, and correcting problems, straightening out your benefits gets harder and more out of reach for more and more Americans. That is what we face right now. So the question that I want to pose to the senator from New Jersey is this. At a time when Donald Trump and Elon Musk are looking for an indirect way to cut Social Security benefits, and let's just pause here, if I can, to say, why?
Yes.
Why go out of your way to cut Social Security benefits? Come on now. 73 million Americans rely on this. This has been the backbone of America's promise to its own people that you did the work, you put in the money, and now you're entitled to the benefit on the other side. Why are they doing this? Because they want to reduce the amount of money that is available for Social Security and instead take that money over so that they can advance tax cuts for billionaires and billionaire corporations. They're just trying to grease the skids here for the billionaires to get even richer and ask the 73 million Americans who rely on Social Security to pay for it out of their own hides. So the question I have for the senator from New Jersey is, when Elon Musk and Donald Trump are determined to try to use a backdoor way to cut Social Security benefits, A, are they acting legally? And B, how do we put a stop to this?
Yeah, amen, amen. You know, Reverend Warnock was here earlier and was preaching and quoting scripture, but you are preaching a gospel of truth, my friend, from a civic gospel that speaks to the cares and the concerns of the American hope and the American dream and the American Constitution, because you and I both know the answer to the question. I have to say, for folks who are watching, she is the great senator from Massachusetts, but she used to be a professor in New Jersey. She was a Rutgers professor. I was listening to her way before I got to the Senate, when she was fighting for the CFPB, when she was fighting so people would not be taken advantage, was establishing the first ever agency whose sole purpose is to stand up to big banks, to big corporate powers, and defend people, an institution that got billions and billions of dollars back into the pockets of the American consumer. And what did Donald Trump and Doge do to an institution that we set up in Congress in a bipartisan way? They did something that is against the Constitution and went after to hack it to pieces so that it's no more. But add insult to injury, down here, we just had a vote on overdraft fees that was stunning to me because there was just no defense of it. It was a clear thing. Some of the big banks said, you know what, we don't need those usury fees, it's actually wrong. Some of the big banks just stood up and said, did the right thing, but a handful of others were still taking advantage of people, and this Senate got to vote, which side are you on? And we failed. So your question is right. You detail what is right, how people are getting hurt already, how the benefits of Social Security are already being affected, how rural places, Social Security offices are being closed already. And the question of why, under the guise of efficiency, but you're hurting our elders who deserve dignity in their retirement. It's stunning to me, Senator Warren, stunning to me that we're actually even having this discussion and having this debate when there's been not one congressional hearing about what Elon Musk is doing. The letters I read earlier about Social Security were painful because people wanted to know what was being done with their most confidential and private information. I want to continue because we were working through national security, and given the time, I want to rush to just read some stories of voices. I wanted to come to the floor and read people's voices, elevate voices. And so here's a voice, a statement from Julia Hurley from Bergen County, New Jersey. Thank you, Julia, I see you. My family's roots are deep in New Jersey, all the way back to my great-grandparents, with my mom's side from Bogota, Fairlawn, and Upper Saddle River, and my dad's side from Spring Lake and Wall Township. I have north and south roots. My grandfather started a manufacturing company that my cousin still runs, and my other grandfather ran a trucking company based in New Jersey. I was born and raised in Park Ridge and learned from a very young age about the importance of serving and community. Both of my grandfathers served in World War II. What a family. My family was always involved in charity and our churches, and ever since I can remember, I wanted to help people, doing my first fundraiser for homeless people in Bergen County when I was maybe 8 or 9. The passion for service took an international bent after I went abroad for the first time during an exchange trip to Germany with Park Ridge Junior Senior High School in 2001 and fell in love with travel. Shortly after that, September 11th happened. 7 people from my little town were killed in the towers, and we could see the smoke from ground zero from a hill in the next town over. For those of you who don't know, Park Ridge is very close to where I grew up, and my childhood best friend died in the towers. This was when I learned how my little suburban bubble could be impacted by things worlds away. I became obsessed with trying to help and wanting to drive a career that would be in service to my country and people elsewhere so that we would be more inclined, so those people would be more inclined to work with us than against us. I went on to study diplomacy and international relations at Seton Hall University, graduating magna cum laude and determined to work for the State Department at some point. My 15-year winding career path after that took me into the advocacy space and onto humanitarian and peace-building work in Gaza with the UN, as well as in Tunisia and Egypt. In 2022, after a year as a policy advisor with the International Committee of the Red Cross, I was recruited to join USAID. And I couldn't have been more excited. This was a dream job, an opportunity to serve my country and impact policy in a real way, sharing what I had learned from working abroad and at home to shape U.S. foreign policy and efforts to advance development and humanitarian assistance on the ground. I was eventually promoted to a senior policy advisor role in USAID's Office of Policy, where I was developing policy that was shaping the way USAID worked, trying to break down silos across the agency to be more effective and efficient in our response to some of the toughest crises in the world. I got the opportunity to not only prepare talking points for high-level events and for our leadership, but even brief the administrator a couple times. That all came crashing down around January 28th as my colleagues began being terminated and furloughed. I went into the Trump administration like any other bureaucrat, ready to engage and help because I want every administration to succeed and lean on us as experts to help advance American policy. I worked with our team, and I briefed our political appointee director, who started on Inauguration Day, and hoped to see what I could do to continue building on the reform work I had been doing for a year at that point. Instead, everything quickly unraveled. Elon Musk called USAID a criminal organization that should die, he said. And the President of the United States deemed us radical left lunatics. I was terrified, afraid of what people might do when 2 of the most powerful men in the world were saying things like that. Our jobs were then in question, and the USAID offices were quickly closed, with our belongings still in them. We were left not knowing what our fate would be for weeks. As DOGE dismantled USAID, I watched in horror as the programs shut down. The people we served suffered. And friends and colleagues from the agency and our partner organizations lost their livelihoods and their mission-driven careers. On March 14th, I was finally terminated. I've been heartbroken since, shifting between deep depressions and rage. Because of the sledgehammer approach that DOGE took, the entire foreign assistance architecture was broken. Organizations I would have gone on to work for are going bankrupt, cutting staff, and definitely not hiring. I spent 15 years building up this career that I loved beyond words. Every time I would leave my late father while he was dying in a hospital in 2012, he would tell me to go save the world. This wasn't just a career. It was a calling to serve. I have no idea what I will do next. In some ways, I feel lucky because I got married last May, God bless you, and am on my husband's health insurance, thank God. But he also works for the government, and he could be riffed with a moment's notice. I also have a supportive family who will help me if it really gets bad. But the uncertainty has probably been one of the most painful parts of all of this. Not knowing what will come next and just fearing it will be worse than the day before. All we wanted to do was serve. I want to say thank you to Julia Hurley from Bergen County, my home county in New Jersey. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for laying your pain plain and your anger, making it real in my heart as I know it's in yours. I stand for you today. Personal statement from Catherine Baker from Neptune, New Jersey. I have been furloughed from my job at USAID implementing partner since February 14th, 2025. I have 13 years experience supporting USAID contractors in business development and recruitment efforts, mostly in conflict and post-conflict settings. The following is how I got here today. I was born in Neptune and raised there until I went to college. My father is a lifelong Neptune resident whose Jersey roots date all the way back to the early 1700s. Wow. When my Scottish ancestors came here in search of religious freedom and economic opportunity to help build much of what is Gloucester and Mercer counties. My mother is an immigrant born in Coro, Venezuela, to refugees escaping fascism bombs and economic ruin in Spain and Sicily. Every summer, my mom and I traveled to Venezuela to see her mother, my aunts and uncles, and countless cousins. Coro, the capital of Venezuela's state, responsible for most of oil refining, sits on the Caribbean coast and is about 15 minutes plane ride from Aruba, surrounded by sand dunes. Our family friends lived in homes with dirt floors, corrugated aluminum roofs, and a hose out back you would use to shower while fending off the chickens that roamed freely. Coro is a city in constant drought. We would get water every other day, and you'd use a trash bin filled with water and a ladle to shower on your non-water days. Coro, as you could imagine, couldn't be more different from Neptune, New Jersey. I went to St. James Elementary and Red Bank Catholic High School in Red Bank from kindergarten through 12th grade. If 13 years of Catholic school teaches you anything, it's the importance of taking care of one another, especially those that are suffering from poverty, famine, and disease. I remember being given small cartons when we were tasked with filling with spare change so that we could ship them off to some faraway place where we were told stories of children just like us who were facing unimaginable hardships. I was so moved by the notion that a child, not so different from myself, didn't have enough to eat or had lost their parents in a conflict I couldn't begin to understand. My senior year at RBC, I took a class called Globalization and Social Justice. The class was taught by a longtime family friend, Mary Logan, herself a former nun. Miss Logan taught us about the Rwandan genocide and had us watch Hotel Rwanda as a class. She made sure we knew the reasons why this happened, understood how dehumanization and hatred can lead to mass torture and executions, and critiqued the international response to the genocide that led to nearly 1 million deaths in 100 days. That year, Miss Logan took us to Keene University to see Nick Kristof speak about Darfur and made sure we knew the signs of genocide when we saw it. How can we let this happen again, we asked her. I wore my Save Darfur green rubber bracelet and t-shirt everywhere I went. What could I, a kid living at the Jersey Shore, do to help? During this period of enlightenment led by Miss Logan, the Mary Knoll Missionaries funded school in Kibera, Kenya, that we were supporting was threatened by electoral violence in December of 2007. We received letters from the nuns there. We were Miss Logan's personal friends. We received letters from nuns there who were Miss Logan's personal friends about how the fires nearly reached the school and the children who were already living in Africa's largest slum stood poised to lose the little they had, including their lives. Upon returning from Christmas break, Mary Knoll Affiliates Club sprang into action. We raised awareness and funds and proudly sent money from bake sales and door knocking to our friends in Kenya. We received media attention from WCBS in New York, and our story got picked up by other channels and newspapers. I was amazed that my efforts in Monmouth County were having such meaningful and real impact on a crisis happening thousands of miles away. I was passionate about this work. I was seemingly good at it, or as good as an 18-year-old could be. Could I actually turn this into a career? Could I help even more people across the world? I'd like to think I did that. I'd like to think I did that. And I'm crying as I write this because I wonder if I ever will do it again. The past 10 years, I've focused on conflict prevention, stabilization, preventing, countering violent extremism, and citizen security in conflict or post-conflict areas. Not only did I conduct desk research and analyze problem sets from behind a desk, but I got to travel to those countries and meet with local governments, civil society organizations, and advocacy groups to hear from them about the issues and discuss solutions. I spoke with survivors of the devastating 2004 tsunami in Sri Lanka and Tamils whose fathers and brothers disappeared during the Civil War and are likely burned in unmarked graves somewhere on the island. I worked closely with a woman my age whose families fled Kosovo to the United States during the war when we were about 9 years old and returned as soon as she could to her home country to promote continued peace between Albanians and Serbs. My recent trips to Kosovo were so illuminating, not because of the pain or struggle of these people, but because of the respect and admiration and gratitude they had towards the United States of America. Anyone who has been to Pristina knows of the Bill Clinton and Bob Dole statues. I didn't know about that. As well as the Hillary Boutique. A few years ago, when I was negotiating an employment offer with a Ghanaian candidate for a USAID-funded Preventing Violent Extremism program, I couldn't meet his salary expectations. He said to me, "That's okay. I will take whatever you can give me. If the United States will make sacrifices for the people of Ghana in support of this program, I'm willing to make a sacrifice too with a pay cut." He proudly accepted the offer. The recognition of these funds could be spent elsewhere was not lost on him. Generosity and kindness are always more greatly appreciated by those who have less. All but one of my company's USAID contracts, which totaled nearly $400 million, were terminated almost overnight by DOGE. Over 80% of our Virginian-based office was laid off or furloughed. I bought my first condo last year, a milestone we all strive for, but too few people my age are able to achieve. I applied to 60 jobs in 1 month, all of which I'm qualified for. I have received 2 interview requests. This after being a sought-after professional in my industry with a strong network cultivated through years of hard work. This has ruined me. My mortgage payment isn't what makes me cry, though. It's our local staff and partners that come to mind every night as I say my prayers. My colleague, a Sudanese refugee living in Kampala, working on a terminated USAID peace-building program from Sudan, texts me every week to ask how I'm doing. He called me to make me smile because he knew I was crying. He now calls me Sad Eyes. And has made it his mission to never see tears fall from these lashes again. I obviously lie to him and say mission accomplished, but it will never be true. Not only is the United States not stronger, not safer, not more prosperous, but the beacon of our democracy grows dim across the globe. Without leadership, other countries hostile to the United States will step in and innocent people will continue dying. When I close my eyes, the specter of very real people from my travels and projects appear, and I hear the echoes of suffering they shared with me. Suffering they were sure to know was alleviated, however temporarily, by the United States of America through USAID. And wherever they could, they would thank me. Whatever they could, they would thank me and America. They would thank me and America for it. Thank you, Catherine Baker from Neptune, New Jersey. And Catherine, I see you. I see you, Catherine. I hear you. I stand for you. But I want to share something with you. One of the most extraordinary trips I've had as a United States Senator was to Chad, to go up to the border of Chad and Sudan and see the horrors. I've been to refugee camps all around the globe, but see the horrors of what was happening again in Sudan. You wore that Save Darfur t-shirt in your earlier days, but the ethnic cleansing is going on right now. I've never seen so many malnourished babies, barely able to hold up their heads, people fleeing tyranny, and they fled across the border to meet Americans because we were there. With less than 1% of the American budget, we were there, standing for our values, our highest ideals, our faith traditions, the understanding that when we are out there making the world safer, responding to crises, not only were people seeing the help they need, but they saw the light and the beacon of this democracy. And it pains me that Chris Coons comes down here and shares the headlines from today's newspaper that in Myanmar, in this horrific earthquake, the agency that used to respond to that tragedy, that human tragedy, doesn't have the resources. America's not there. It's a void. And then Chris Coons says in the article I'm surely to read today or tomorrow whenever I can't stand anymore, he says, who fills that vacuum? Who showed up? But the PRC, China showed up. Less than 1% of our budget, less than 1% of our budget, and people like the folks I read whose whole life, all they wanted to do was to be the light of the American torch of freedom and hope to the world, and they had the rug pulled out from under them. But here's what's worse, because we've had, Chris Murphy, we've had meetings with some of the people behind the scenes that are savagely cutting. And the stories are horrible. People in dangerous places that we sent there having their emails cut, having their phones turned off, pregnant women who don't know how they're going to get out of those areas. And James Mattis, as we discussed, said, if you cut these kind of programs, buy me more bullets, because there'll be more instability. There'll be more political democracies being overthrown. There'll be more terrorism. There'll be more violence. And we are old enough as a nation in 250 years to know that if we don't meet these terrors abroad, they will visit us at home. As Chuck Schumer said, I was there watching the towers come down. And in the Sahel, before I do this in Africa, that's the threat. In Togo, in Ghana, in Benin, the northern parts of the country, they're fighting terrorism. Oh, God, yes, I will. I yield for a question while retaining the floor. Chris Murphy.
We have a few more colleagues who are going to join us before the top of the hour. But I just wanted you to round this out and ask you the question this way. Often when we talk about the withdrawal of USAID from the world, the withdrawal of the United States from international bodies like the WHO. The beneficiary is China. But I think you were hinting, as you talked about the African continent, that the threat is much broader than that, because USAID is not just doing counter-China programming, it's also doing counter-extremism programming. In Lebanon, for instance, it's doing the primary work to push back against Hezbollah's political influence there. It's doing work to counter Russian influence around its periphery. And so isn't it the case, Senator Booker, that as USAID is pulled off the playing field, for reasons we still don't understand, that it is all of our adversaries, state adversaries and non-state adversaries, who are tragically celebrating at this opening that we have given them to gain additional influence?
Senator Murphy, that is correct. You've been one of the most articulate voices for this decision. I shouldn't even call it decision, this reckless trashing of USAID, this vilification of the proud men and women that stand in Ebola outbreak, that stand against terrorism, that stand against hardships and ethnic cleansing, that stand against malnutrition. You're so good at pointing out that those are American interests, and that not to do that makes this a more dangerous and unsafe world. A world where countries like ours want to lob missiles into Yemen post facto of crises. So I hear you, Chris Murphy, and I answer your question with a simple understanding that what you're saying is right, and I'm going to tell you that I've got so many other to read, but we are way behind the schedule of where we wanted to be at this point. We're way behind at about 16 hours and 24 minutes. And so to obey my staff, as senators are told to do, I want to move quickly to just the housing issues. Oh, I'm sorry, unless, of course. So I want to move quickly to housing and start really with the theme of affordable housing. Again, we keep returning to the economy and how the Trump administration is making things worse in every area, especially for people struggling. And so let me be clear that for decades, under Democrat and Republican presidents, it's become increasingly difficult for working class Americans to afford a home. In recent years, this nationwide housing affordability crisis for so many Americans has nearly reached a breaking point. The crisis now impacts nearly all Americans, shared across all demographics, regardless of partisan identification, race, age, gender, education, or whether you own or rent your home. We in America are in a housing crisis. According to the Center for American Progress, 80% of Americans living in rural communities believe housing affordability is getting worse, while 72% of residents in urban areas feel the same way. In October 2024, the Center for American Progress found no matter your zip code, the goal of home ownership in America is drifting further out of reach all across the country. Over the past two decades, housing costs have dramatically outpaced income growth in the United States, increasing the rent burden, heightening barriers to home ownership. The Housing Price Index, a gauge of how selling prices for single-family homes have changed over time, was more than 50% higher in July 2024 than it was in July 2019. According to the Brookings Institution, the U.S. housing market was short 4.9 million housing units in 2023 relative to the mid-2000s. Decades of policy at the federal, state, and local level have all contributed to this reality. Let's not blame some rank partisanship. It's been decades in the making. There are far too homes in the United States, and there are far too homes being built in the United States. The cost of housing keeps rising. Rents continue to skyrocket. Median home prices are on the rise, which makes it harder and harder for families to make ends meet. The vast majority of young Americans are hard-pressed to save for the chance of one day having enough for a down payment to buy a home. Almost half of all renters in America struggle to pay their rent. Almost half of all renters are struggling to pay the rent, devoting more than 1/3 of their income to housing costs. Since the pandemic, rents have jumped more than 12% year over year. Hidden rental fees and other expenses on already cost-burdened tenants continue to mount as landlords assume more and more power and leverage, leaving tenants and prospective home buyers with nowhere to turn. Last year, NPR methodically walked through the supply shortage that's impacting our country. But before I read this article, I see that my colleague, my friend, extraordinary leader from Maryland is here, and I think he has a question for me first.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, I want to thank my friend, and I want to start by thanking the senator from New Jersey, the senior senator in New Jersey, for shining a spotlight on what is happening in our country at this moment, and specifically what is going to be happening here in the United States Senate later this week or next. And I have a question for the senator, but I want to take some of the threads of what you've been saying as I put this to you, because you are shining a light on the great betrayal. And that is candidate Trump went all over the country saying that he was going to be a president for the forgotten Americans, that he was going to be a president that looked out for working people. And he said he was going to focus on bringing costs down and prices down in the United States of America. And yet, ever since he was sworn in, he has done just the opposite. Prices are going up, including, as the senator was talking about, housing prices. Affordable housing is a crisis in this country. And yet we see Elon Musk and his Doge cronies cutting deeply into affordable housing programs over at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We see also, and tomorrow he calls it Liberation Day, it's actually going to be sales tax increase day. There was testimony that we've got in the Banking and Housing Committee that when you increase these tariffs on Canada, as he's proposed to do, not in a targeted way, but in an across-the-board way, according to the National Association of Home Builders, that will increase housing prices for Americans up to 10% more at a time we're already facing an affordable housing crisis. And of course, the folks who benefit the most are those billionaires who are part of his cabinet and others in the hedge fund industry who are going out and buying up a lot of houses, not because they need the house for their family, but because they want to flip it at a big profit, making it even less affordable to the American people. So the housing crisis is one part of what is getting even worse because of the actions of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. And it's part of this greater theme of the great betrayal. And later this week, Republicans here in the Senate say they're planning to bring to the floor what we call a budget resolution, which is a framework that will be providing for very big tax cuts for the ultra-rich Americans, tax cuts for big corporations, some of which are offshoring all of their profits. Senator Wyden and I were on the floor just last week talking about how Pfizer has half of its sales revenues here in the United States, but books none of its profits here, and therefore by this scheme called round tripping, where you sort of push your money around the world, they lower their taxes, which means the American people get shortchanged. So all of this is part of a scheme to provide tax cuts for the very wealthy at everybody else's expense. And the senator from New Jersey has been shining a light on what it means when we say this will come at the expense of other Americans, that this tax cut for the very rich and big corporations will come at the expense of the rest of America. So I want to amplify that as I do a wind-up. to the senator. Number one, it's Elon Musk and the Doge operation. Let me be very clear that this is part of the most corrupt bargain we've seen in American history. Elon Musk spent $280 million to help elect Donald Trump president, and Donald Trump has turned the keys to the federal government over to Elon Musk, not for efficiency, but to rig the government in favor of people like Elon Musk. That's why they want to get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is a bureau that has returned billions of dollars to Americans who were cheated by scam artists. And they are coming in to dismantle the CFPB because they want to be on the side of the scam artists and deny American consumers the benefit of getting their dollars back when they've been cheated. So this has nothing to do with government efficiency. It has to do both with rigging the government for people like Elon Musk and trying to lay the groundwork, claiming lots of cuts that they will then use to pay for, they say, tax cuts for the very rich. So who's being cut by Elon Musk? I don't know, Senator, if you saw the other day in the sort of spin room at the White House, did you catch that where Elon Musk and some of his folks were explaining the work they did? They said, we're really doing this with a scalpel. Well, the reason that's especially interesting is it was just weeks earlier that Elon Musk brandished a chainsaw.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
At CPAC, which is actually, they met over here in my state of Maryland. That's what they're doing. They're taking a chainsaw, and they're taking a chainsaw to departments that help our veterans. These are people who care for our veterans, and our veterans are being especially hard hit, including when they did these firings, arbitrary firings, right, of probationary employees. And veterans were saying, why are we being hit so hard? And the White House spokesperson said, and I'm quoting, perhaps they're not fit to have a job at the moment. That was the response from one of the White House spokespersons, as if individuals who'd served our country in the military were not fit to serve our government as civilians. That's the kind of attitude we've got. We just learned today that the RIFs, the reductions in force letters, were received by folks in the Department of Health and Human Services. So these are people who help with the public health of all Americans. And they do important work at FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, right? They make sure that the foods that we eat and the medicines we take are safe, and that they do what they say they're going to do in the case of medicines. They do work at NIH, the National Institutes of Health, to develop cures and treatments for diseases that hit every American family, and they're cutting there. They're cutting in these places not for government efficiency, but to create what they believe is the space for tax cuts for the very rich. We talked about what they're doing over the Department of Health, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. At the Social Security Administration, which, by the way, has its headquarters in my state of Maryland, we have thousands of workers who are there to deliver hard-earned benefits to the American people. And the reality is that the Social Security Administration operates incredibly efficiently. You know, the former commissioner for Social Security, Martin O'Malley, reminds us that Allstate Insurance Company operates at an 11% overhead. Liberty Mutual operates at a 23% overhead. The Social Security Administration, 0.5% overhead. The Social Security Administration workforce is now at a very low level in terms of personnel compared to what it was years ago, and yet they're serving a record number of Americans, 73 million Americans, and they've never missed a payment. Never missed a payment. So this talk about going after Social Security and they're going to somehow make it more efficient, and of course Elon Musk called it a Ponzi scheme, when the senator and I know it's not a Ponzi scheme, it's a promise to the American people. So first they discontinued telephone service, as if all the seniors could somehow just connect, with by Wi-Fi or whatever it may be. A lot of people, of course, rely on telephones, so they cut that. They said, well, if you have trouble, go to one of the local regional Social Security offices. Well, they're cutting regional Social Security offices, lots of them. And then when you go there and you don't find many people there, well, whoops, we just cut 7,000 people from Social Security. So a benefit isn't meaningless if you can't actually access the benefit. And what they're doing is making it harder for Americans to get those benefits. So when we hear about the Musk Doge operation, make no mistake, not about efficiency. It's about trying to put together some kind of savings that they then want to use to at least partially pay for tax cuts for the very rich. Another way they're doing that, we've heard a lot about that, and the senator's spoken about it, is cutting Medicaid and food nutrition programs. In fact, I think we recall a number of weeks ago, we had a couple of amendments here on the floor of the Senate saying, okay, if you're going to do these tax cuts, at least don't cut Medicaid or Medicare or food and nutrition programs. Every Republican senator voted against those amendments. In other words, not to protect those programs, meaning they're fair game for big cuts to pay for tax cuts for the very wealthy. So that's another area where they're very focused, which is cutting important programs that benefit millions and millions of Americans. There's another way they're doing it, and Senator from New Jersey, and again, thank you for shining a light on all this, has talked about it, which is these across-the-board tariffs, right? So I think all of us know that strategically targeted tariffs, they can be useful at certain points in time to protect strategic American industries. I'm for those. But across-the-board tariffs, and across-the-board tariffs on a friend and ally like Canada or Mexico, all that is a tax increase on the American people. Let's be clear. So these are the areas where Donald Trump, having said that he was going to be there for working people, is doing the opposite, right? These across-the-board tariff cuts are going to increase costs and prices for the American people. Cutting Medicaid and food nutrition programs is going to hurt the very people that Donald Trump on the campaign trail said he was fighting for. And the Doge Musk operation is taking a chainsaw to important services and important consumer protections that benefit all Americans in order to claim that they're providing some savings for tax cuts for the rich. So it wasn't that long ago that just down the hall here, Donald Trump was sworn in as president. And I remember what he said. He said, this is going to be a golden age for America. And who was sitting right behind him? Elon Musk, the richest person in the world, and other billionaires in the Trump cabinet, including one who just said not that long ago that Americans on Social Security wouldn't miss one of their Social Security checks. Only the fraudsters would notice that. Say that to the 73 million people who get Social Security. But that's the attitude of the billionaires in this Trump cabinet, the people he's really looking out for. And so when he says a golden age for America, that's who he means. He means Elon Musk and the billionaires, Elon Musk who's rigging the government for the billionaires, and all the others in the cabinet who don't think Americans would miss a Social Security payment that they earned. So my question to you And I want to, again, thank the senator from New Jersey. I know it's been a long day's journey into the night. But it's important that we address these issues in the courts, and the courts are upholding the rule of law, that we address these issues and fight them in Congress, and that we do so in communities across the country, and people need to understand what's happening. So the core issue here, is it not, my friend, that Donald Trump really is betraying the people he said he was going to fight for. And at the end of the day, and we're going to see that later this week in the Senate, the goal is to provide these big tax breaks to wealthy people at the expense of everybody else in America. That is the big betrayal. So if you could just zero in once again on the central narrative that we're seeing play out during the Trump administration.
Well, you're putting it right. Donald Trump made commitments to America. We have quotes of him at rally after rally. I'm going to bring your, he said, oh, grocery, that's a really great word, I think he said. I'm going to bring down grocery prices. Well, grocery prices are up dramatically. The American dream, and many of us see that as owning a home. Well, you said it. Home prices are already up, but with these tariffs, they could go upwards of 10% more. You can be sure that Canadian lumber coming down here is going to be expensive. You can see Donald Trump making it more difficult to access health care, and this massive reconciliation is going to be a direct attack on working class health care, on health care of expectant mothers, on health care of Americans with disabilities, on health care of the majority of seniors in nursing homes. I'm about to go, my next chapter is all going to be about how Trump is rolling back common sense protections for clean air and water. And Elizabeth Warren said it very powerfully. He's reducing services, which is a service cut to people with Social Security. In so many ways, Americans should see these crises looming, these attacks, but ask yourself one economic question. With the stock market, who just had its worst quarter in years, and people's retirement savings, if they have it in 401ks, is going down. Ask yourself this question. I ask America to please ask yourself this financial question. Am I better off than I was 71 days ago? Am I better off or worse off? And this is before he's even gotten going, because we see what's about to happen. With this whole sham reconciliation process, they're already trying to change the rules to obscure what they're doing. This is what they're doing. 3 things you should take home. Are we going to let them again, like they did with the ACA, with the Affordable Care Act, come after health care for 70+ million Americans by doing their proposed $880 billion cuts? Or are we going to allow them to blow a hole so big in the trillions of dollars, they're going to push it out for over 10 years? Are they going to create such a deficit in our country that our children's children, they're stealing from our children's children and putting on a deficit that they're going to have to pay for? And number 3, are they going to let them do all of that to renew tax cuts that the Congressional Budget Office at every independent agency says very clearly would add trillions, would give trillions of dollars of tax cuts that go disproportionately to the wealthiest in our nation? That's the addition. That's what we know. And it doesn't account for the things that he's doing to our allies. It doesn't account for how he's turning his back on NATO. It doesn't account for how he's praising Putin and calling Zelensky a dictator. It doesn't account for how he's giving advantage to China around the world, from the region in Southeast Asia all the way to Africa. It doesn't account for how he's already made it harder to enroll for the Affordable Care Act. It doesn't account for all the other things he's doing that we wake up and hear every day, not to mention trying to threaten Greenland, trying to threaten Panama, trying to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. All these things he didn't tell us he was going to do, didn't promise. He promised to lower your grocery prices, they're higher. He promised, I'll be a better steward of the economy. It's worse than we inherited. Over and over, he's breaking promises and doing outrageous things like disappearing people off of American streets, violating fundamental principles of this document, invoking the Alien Enemies Act from the 1700s that was last used to put Japanese Americans in internment camps? Do we see what's happening? How much is enough? that we have to stand and do something different, not just in this body, in America, because you know this. How we stopped him in his last term was the American people rose up, spoke up, stood up, rose up in the most extraordinary nonviolent demonstrations and demands. So thank you.
Senator, yield for another question.
Yes, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
And I see that my friend and colleague, Senator Alsterbrooks from the great state of Maryland, is on the floor. So I'm going to be very brief with this question. And I want to thank you for reminding us, of course, of the other great betrayal that's been going on over the last 70-plus days. There's the betrayal against the American people and working people here at home, but then there's the betrayal of our allies, like the Ukrainians, who Donald Trump is throwing under the bus as we speak, and other close partners and allies around the world. And I have to depart here for a moment because we have a hearing in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I'm privileged to serve on that committee with the gentleman from New Jersey. And one of the people before the committee is their nominee to be our ambassador to Turkey. Now, of course, Erdogan just locked up his major opponent, the popular mayor of Istanbul. We've not heard a peep from the Trump administration about the question of how this undermines democracy. But I want to close on the point that you just raised. It's kind of hard for Donald Trump to complain about Erdogan disappearing people when right here in the United States of America, you had a Turkish student at Tufts disappeared by people who showed up without any identification, some with hoods on, and sent her apparently to Louisiana because she spoke out on an important issue of national concern. And the First Amendment is pretty clear. You can engage in controversial speech that someone may like or dislike, but you're protected, and that includes everybody here in America, because that's an important value to us. Apparently, it's not an important value to Donald Trump, who, like Erdogan, essentially wants to whisk away anybody who disagrees with him. I thank, again, the senator from New Jersey and just ask him to elaborate on that. But I also see my friend and colleague, the senator from Maryland.
Answer to your question, then, which is the irony that this president is remaining quiet about folks that are violating international law in many ways. So I think it's absurd, and you're right, it's another betrayal.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
First, I'd like to commend my colleague. I want to thank you, first of all, for your spiritual obedience. I want to thank you so much as well for your commitment and your dedication. And want to thank you as well for your courageous leadership. I want to thank you also, Senator Booker, for your recognition of the times that we are living in. These are times that we will recount, our children will recount, and I think all of those of good conscience who watch during this time and say nothing will also be held to account. As the senator has eloquently remarked, these are not normal times. We're watching an administration that is drunk with vengeance, hatred, and surrounded by incompetent people who are taking callous actions, who are inhumane, and because of their incompetence are making costly mistakes that will harm the American people and denigrate the hardworking people of this country by proposing tax cuts. And these tax cuts are not designed to help the average American person. They are designed to help billionaires. And they're doing so by firing thousands of middle-class workers and more. What we are seeing before our eyes is not only unconscionable, we know as well that it is deeply immoral, that it is inhumane, it is wicked. We are seeing with glee the actions of people who are so happy to tear down, but I am watching and waiting to see what it is they intend to build in this country. And in your remarks over these hours, you have made that plain for the American people to see. You've uplifted the stories of everyday people And what we recognize as we hear about the firings and we hear about the devastation and chaos is we're not talking about numbers, we're talking about humans, about people. These are our friends, these are our family members, these are our neighbors, these are our church friends, these are our colleagues who this administration has harmed. And so my question today centers around the topic of housing. We have a housing crisis in this country, that's no secret. And in fact, we recognize that through the actions of this administration, what is harmful will be exacerbated. Maryland is nearly 100,000 housing units short, and as you know, it is both about an affordability and a supply problem. We need to make home ownership, which is part of the American dream, and how the average American builds wealth in this country, accessible to more Americans. I think about my parents, Mr. Senator, who married at 21 and 22 years old. And at the time that they married, although my father was a car salesman and selling newspapers and my mother was a receptionist, 5 years into their marriage, they could afford to buy a home. This is no longer the expectation of the average American family. My own 19-year-old daughter doesn't have the realistic hope that she can follow even her grandparents. This problem affects red states and it affects blue states, which is the theme that you have hit on in all of these hours of speaking. When this president acts against the interest of the middle class, we recognize that he is not just harming Democrats as he intends, but unfortunately his actions harm everyday Americans. It affects those who voted for him, it affects those who didn't vote for him, and it affects those who did not vote at all. He's harming Republicans too. He's harming Americans. And so this administration is slashing funding and personnel at the very agencies that are tasked with addressing this crisis. He is illegally firing HUD employees. And this administration has stalled millions of dollars in previously allocated funding intended to help those who need affordable housing. And again, his actions are so indiscriminate, so immoral, so callous, so heartless, that he is impacting the very people who supported him, as well as those who didn't. This administration has effectively ended enforcement of the Fair Housing Act, one of the most important American civil rights laws. This administration is considering privatizing the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which guarantees over half of the U.S. mortgage market. And to make matters worse, this administration is proposing sweeping tariffs on our allies, driving up the cost of home construction. And let's be clear, absolutely none of this will help to build homes. None of this will make home ownership more accessible to Marylanders or Americans. And in fact, we understand that it is not the intention of this administration to do so. It's for the billionaires to be able to afford their tax cuts. And so I've heard from people all across my state, blue areas, red areas, purple areas, every area, who are concerned about this. And so I have a question for you, and I want to thank you as I ask the question for sacrificing your own body today to bring attention to this. What are you seeing in the state of New Jersey about how this administration's unconscionable actions are making housing less affordable and home ownership less accessible?
The Senator, I want to thank her for the question. I want to thank her for being my colleague, but more important than even being my friend, she is a spiritual sister of mine and was very kind to me when I was telling her that I was going to do this, and gave me so much encouragement and prayer, and I just love you and I'm grateful. And you read the litany of things. I had a whole section, a whole binder that my staff told me to skip and go to this one about all the things, going in deep and depth to all the things the Trump administration is doing to make housing more unaffordable, more inaccessible, more expensive, more discrimination in housing, which we know is still a problem, more challenges, more pain heaped upon rural areas, and more complications and problems for building affordable housing in all areas. It is so frustrating to me that this is a problem. We cannot lay the crisis of housing at one administration in the United States. We need to have bold visions and ideas to address this. I am so excited about this next generation of Americans that are rising up with bold visions. I want to give a shout out to Ezra Klein. His book is a must-read, Abundance. This is a vision of doing great things again, of building housing, of redeeming the American dream. But to have a president that is dead set on, for the next 4 years, to do the kind of things that you made a litany of, and now, tomorrow, is going to bring tariffs that are going to raise the price even more of housing, is outrageous. Where are his promises to make this country more affordable and more accessible? And you heard the data that I read about, we have so many millions of Americans, close to the majority of renters now spend more than a third of their income on rent, which is a very definition our government has of housing insecurity. So it should anger people in this country. Even if you own your home, have paid off your mortgage, you should be angry about what they're doing to the American dream, and that there's no bold ideas coming from this administration to help. In fact, they're hurting. They're hurting. So thank you very much to my colleague. Thank you for giving me strength as you did in prayer. And I just thank you for the question that should anger people, that should inspire people, that should activate people, that should engage people, that should demand from us that we take our country away from those who want to do so much harm. I want to start by reading until someone, I know the prayer. I'm going to keep going. I want to talk about environmental protections and how this country is becoming less safe for people with emphysema or with asthma, because Donald Trump is rolling back common sense environmental protections, threatening our children's future and hurting our nation's economy. Energy costs in America are continuing to rise, making it harder and harder for working families to pay their bills. And at a time that we should be investing in clean energy, this administration is canceling projects that would create more jobs for Americans and lower energy prices. He claims he supports an all-of-the-above strategy, but that's clearly not what we're seeing. And there's too much silence about it. All Americans, regardless of where you're born, we deserve safe drinking water, clean air, and an equal opportunity for a healthy and fulfilling life. President Trump promised America the cleanest air and the cleanest water, but on entering office, he immediately instructed the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to cut a long list of common sense environmental protections. This administration is rolling back efforts to reduce emissions from power plants. He's letting polluters pollute our air more. That affects the health of Americans. It drives up aggravating the rates of asthma and emphysema, weakening rules that keep our rivers and our water systems clean as well.
Pursuant to the order of February 29, 1960, the hour of 12 noon having arrived, the Senate having been in continuous session since yesterday, the Senate will suspend for a prayer by the Senate chaplain.
Let us pray. Lord of hosts, you have done great things for us, filling our hearts with determination to do your will. You protect us from unseen dangers, supply us with wisdom, and direct our steps. Today, we are grateful for the efforts of the floor staff, the Capitol Police, the stenographers, the pages, and all those who have worked through the night. We pray you give them the strength they need for this day. Today, give our senators the assurance of your presence. Inspire them with a calm faith, a steady peace, and a firm resolve to do your will. Let no weapon formed against them prosper. We pray in your omnipotent name. Amen.
I'm going to continue.
The senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you. I'm going to continue until one of my colleagues asks me a question.
Senator, yield for a question.
One of my heroes in the Senate, a living legend, my partner on some bills that I'm so passionate about expanding IVF, someone that is just freaking awesome. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you, Senator Booker, for taking this important stand and for doing so much to make it clear how much pain Donald Trump and Elon Musk are inflicting on the American people in every sector of our society. I'm going to be asking you a question about what you've heard from agricultural businesses in your state about the damage that this administration is doing and the jobs that either have been or will be lost as a result. But I thought I would give you some background on what I'm hearing as well. I want to focus this body's attention on our nation's farmers and ranchers who seem to be getting punched day after day, week after week by the Trump-Musk oligarchy. Whether it's their harmful tariffs that hurt our soy and corn farmers, canceling and freezing more than $1 billion in funding for schools and food banks to purchase food from local farmers, or halting reimbursement and contract payments that our farmers are already owed, the senator from New Jersey and I are both working together to undo some of the most harmful impacts of these disastrous decisions, including joining forces to push his Honor Farmer Contracts Act forward. We're also starting to hear reports from farmers about just how damaging the Musk-Trump dismantling of USAID is. Jobs and businesses right here in America. For example, I don't know if the senator has heard, but in North Carolina, they had $2.2 billion in USAID awards, including for 27 large-scale farmers who were fulfilling orders for humanitarian food assistance, and 4 universities who were receiving agricultural research funding. More than 300 North Carolina workers have lost their jobs as a result of this freeze. In Georgia, they had over $389 million in USAID awards, including 9 large-scale farmers fulfilling orders for humanitarian food assistance and 6 universities receiving agricultural research funding. Arkansas had over $210 million in USAID awards, including purchases of rice, grain, and beans from our farmers. Florida has lost $91 million in USAID awards, including $38 million to the University of Florida to improve livestock productivity and food security in developing countries. Texas lost over $48 million in USAID awards, including 9 large-scale farmers fulfilling orders for humanitarian food assistance and 8 universities receiving agricultural research funding. The list goes on and on. My neighbors in Iowa over time now have lost over $4 million in USDA food commodity sales. They have gained they had a total of over $149 million in purchases through USDA and other programs for USAID. Illinois has lost $245 million in aid in farm income that would go towards USAID and aid programs. I think that our farmers have been hit with body blow after body blow from this administration, an administration that in their first term and even in the second term promised that they would look out for America. But I have to say to my friend from New Jersey, I don't think that this administration has lived up to their promises to farmers. Remember that a nation that cannot feed itself, if we lose those family farms, if we lose our ag sector, we cannot lead the free world. We cannot feed ourselves. And frankly, farmers have been hit over and over again. These incoming tariffs are going to be disastrous for our farmers. I was just in South Central and Southern Illinois, just across the Mississippi River from Missouri, talking to our farmers in St. Clair County, Illinois. And you know what they tell me? They tell me that the tariffs are going to affect their products being sold overseas. Our top products in Illinois: corn, soybean, pork. We're also the largest grower of pumpkins. So if you get that Libby can of pumpkins at Halloween time and Christmas time and Thanksgiving, that's thanks to Illinois. If you ever want to come, I'll just take you out to the pumpkin fields. So it's the best pumpkins in the country. But frankly, they are being hurt over and over and over again. And so they're going to see the prices on their commodities affected. They can't sell their products overseas to the top countries that purchase their products. At the same time, their inputs, The fertilizer, the equipment that they need will be more expensive. The tariffs against Canada in terms of steel and aluminum is affecting John Deere. John Deere, hundreds of years old, an American company founded in the heartland of this great nation, is laying off people. And so we have to do better by our farmers. And our farmers have been betrayed time and time again by this Trump administration. They promise big things, but then they come in and by cutting programs like USAID, they are hurting our farmers, their bottom line. I sat down and I met with farmers who were 7th generation, 8th generation watching the teenage son of the farmer, and they're afraid that they're not going to have a farm there anymore. Their products, their margins are so tiny that they don't think they're going to make it. So my question to my colleague from New Jersey is, what are you hearing from farmers, and why do you think this administration is taking so many actions that hurt them and hurt American jobs?
I love my colleague. I love my colleague. I love how she's been standing up quite figuratively time and time again on issues. She's really inspired me. I've told folks that on social media I have been celebrating, elevating, liking her content.
Thank you.
She is truly fierce and is a voice that gives me strength. And today she's asking me about one of my favorite subjects. A lot of people were surprised. My staff knows this story well, that I'm on the Ag Committee. And when one of my staffers, a guy sitting over here, Adam Zipkin, who's been with me since 1998, came to me and said, you should go on the Farm Committee, this is going to get me in trouble, I laughed at him. I had committees I loved. And what's that old saying? At first, they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then they finally accept it. He told me all the issues I care about intersect with our farm and food system, that our farmers are such vital parts of America. They need more people standing up and fighting for them, because the American farmers are getting screwed. We're losing thousands of farms in this country. Family farmers are going belly up. The math doesn't work for them. And this president, as you've pointed out, oh gosh, President Trump is causing an unprecedented amount of chaos, instability, and harm for farmers. Farmers already deal with so much uncertainty from prices, weather, pests, and more. They should not have to deal with uncertainty that our government won't follow through, as you said, on contracts. On contracts. I've had farmers from New Jersey to Texas coming to my office about this president freezing contracts that we approved in a bipartisan manner, putting them in financial crisis. One of the first things that Trump and Musk did is freeze thousands of contracts and agreements that have been already made with our farmers. Farmers applied to grant programs and were selected on their merits. They made legally binding contracts, yet starting in late January, farmers found themselves not getting reimbursed, sometimes reading in the news that a particular grant was frozen, or sometimes no information at all, other than that they were not getting their payments processed. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you. I think the issue of contracts is especially important because so much of these cuts are claimed to be to cut waste in government spending. We have a law in the books that says that if we don't make payments according to existing contracts, then we have to pay the interest on those payments that we are late in providing. And so if we, for example, cut $2 billion in or freeze funding payment on $2 billion in contracts as we did with USAID, that means that we're going to have to pay, say, 2% interest rate, $60 million in interest. I don't see where that is a savings for taxpayers. That is a waste of taxpayer dollars. I think that is something that we should be talking about. And I also think that, as you were mentioning, the issue with our farmers, they are important to our national security. The SNAP program is a good example of it. That program was instituted after World War II. We had the very famous example of Audie Murphy, who was the most highly decorated soldier coming out of World War II. He could not pass the initial test to enlist into the Army during World War II because he didn't weigh enough due to malnutrition post the Great Depression. And so we created the SNAP program to make sure that America's young people were fed, were no longer malnourished, so that they could get food in our schools while they were going to school. Because it was good for the United States military to have a workforce that could enlist in the military and meet the standards. That is the origin of the SNAP program, and that has been a program that has sustained our farmers over time. And I think that we are losing sight of that. And so my question to the senator from New Jersey is to hear a little bit more. Have you heard about the SNAP program and also the work that the farmers in New Jersey have been doing in terms of organic and sustainable farming, which is really where the beginning of the organic and sustainable farming movement has begun in this country?
Yeah, I'm aware of another one of my colleagues. I just want to say, yes, I'm aware of that. The way that Trump, I'm just going to summarize, contract freezes, this is one of the ways Trump and Musk are causing havoc. Program cuts. They've eliminated programs, as you said, that support local food systems, including those that connect farmers with food banks and schools and promote regenerative practices. It's stunning. USDA destabilization. Trump and Musk have laid off USDA employees, closed USDA offices, hindering the agency's ability to provide essential services to farmers. Tariff policies. Trump's tariff policies implemented without consultation with or support from farmers will increase farmer costs and consumer food prices. And finally, general chaos, which seems to be something, as you're pointing out, that they're very good at. Farmers already deal with so much uncertainty from prices, weather, pests, and more. They should not have to deal with uncertainty from Donald Trump's administration that will undermine everything that they do.
The question for the senator from New Jersey.
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I would like to ask the senator from New Jersey a question pertaining to the Farm Bill. You speak to uncertainty. One of the things that I've heard from my agricultural sector and my farmers, Farm Bureau in Illinois, is the desperate need for this body to pass a Farm Bill, especially when it comes to crop insurance, the crop insurance program, as well as, again, retaining SNAP benefits. I do think that crop insurance is something that our farmers care deeply about. It is a tool that they use to make sure that they are able to survive when there are bad crop years, whether that is through disease, whether that is through drought or floods. Our farmers certainly, this is a program for them to sustain themselves and be able to look out for themselves. So it is a personal responsibility on the part of farmers. It is especially important for young farmers who are just starting out. Those margins are so tiny. And when you take away the commodity program and the USAID, when you take away SNAP program, and then you don't provide them with crop insurance, you're going to lose those family farms. And what's going to happen? Large agribusinesses are going to take over, and they don't have the well-being of the American people at their heart. And so, I would love to hear from the senator from New Jersey would you agree that what we should be doing right now is not attacking farmers and cutting commodity programs and cutting and freezing funding for USAID that it provides a market for farm products, but instead we should be working on passing a farm bill?
Yeah, I love you for bringing these things to point. Because by the way, with Adam Zipkin, we did a farm tour, and we were in Southern Illinois meeting with Republican farmers. This is now before the pandemic. And you see that we have so much common cause as they're trying desperately to hold on to their farms. And so the crop insurance program, we need to reimagine it so it's more accessible to independent family farmers, not just big agribusinesses. We need to be visionary about our farm bill to create a food system that the farmers want, that help them be better stewards of the land. The oversubscribed programs for regenerative farming and cover crops and environmental practices, they want those things to preserve their soil, reduce their dependence on chemicals. They want those things. They want a farm bill that works for them, and we should be delivering that in a bipartisan way. So you are right on point. But do you hear that from the White House? Not at all. Not at all.
Would the senator yield for a question?
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, Senator Booker, I have a question for you about Medicaid and Medicaid expansion, but I want to start with a little bit of background.
Please.
As you may recall, with the Affordable Care Act, the program Medicaid expansion became an option for my state. And I worked with people of both political parties to make sure that the people of New Hampshire could actually get the benefit of Medicaid expansion. Expanded Medicaid meant that for the first time, working adults who couldn't earn enough money to actually buy insurance themselves, but who were working and single, could actually get health care coverage. Medicaid expansion meant that people with mental illness who wouldn't be covered by traditional Medicaid actually could get health care and could get coverage. People with substance use disorder, with addiction, could finally get Medicaid coverage and get better. And we worked across party lines, took a few tries, but we got Medicaid expansion done in New Hampshire. And today, Medicaid covers more than 180,000 people in my state, including more than 90,000 children, more than 15,000 people with disabilities, and nearly 10,000 seniors. And here's another number that people don't always think about. It covers 10,000 people who are getting addiction treatment. My state, as you know, has been very, very hard hit by the fentanyl crisis. And just in when the president gave his joint address in March, I brought a woman from New Hampshire with me who had been suffering from addiction. Medicaid expansion covered her treatment. She got into recovery. She's now working in the private sector, but also offering counseling and peer recovery services to people who are trying to get their addiction treated through Medicaid expansion. And she is now on private insurance. I remember talking to another Granite Stater while we were working to pass Medicaid expansion. So she had been laid off from her job as part of the Great Recession, right? She had an ongoing chronic stomach condition. So as she got laid off, her health insurance went away too, and she couldn't afford the COBRA fee to keep her health insurance. So she couldn't get health care. So she got sicker and sicker, so she couldn't go to work. But because she was a single adult, she couldn't get Medicaid coverage. So here's somebody who has been working, wants to work, has a chronic illness, can't get to work. We passed Medicaid expansion. She got coverage, she got treatment, and she got back to work. The other great benefit of Medicaid expansion covering people with addiction in New Hampshire has been that as people have gotten better, as more and more physicians have learned to integrate addiction care into primary care, we have a lot more people in recovery. And like many of our states, we also have a workforce shortage. What's been happening now? New Hampshire is a leader in recovery-friendly workplaces so that people who got this Medicaid expansion coverage, got their addiction treated, got better, can go to work in the private sector and get private insurance. That's some of the benefit of Medicaid expansion. But of course, what we are hearing about now from the House and Senate Republicans is their desire to make massive cuts to Medicaid, including Medicaid expansion. And they're doing it. They want to rip away health care from millions of Americans so that they can pay for big tax breaks for billionaires and corporate special interests. So the Republicans have proposed cutting up to 1/3 of federal funding for Medicaid. If those cuts go into effect, that could mean 30,000 children in my state will lose their health care coverage. That means 1 in 5 seniors in New Hampshire could lose their nursing home care. And all told, that could mean 60,000 people cut off from Medicaid, including, for instance, a young man whose parents I just met at the airport, actually, who has autism, and Medicaid pays for his health care, right? But he could be cut off too. So if Republicans continue with this plan, I am really, really concerned about what is going to happen to millions of Americans who currently get their health care through Medicaid. So Senator Booker, can you address the ways in which Medicaid helps provide health care for Americans and the disastrous impact it would have if Republicans proceed with their plan to take coverage away from up to 25 million Americans just so that they can pay for big tax breaks, by the way, for people who are already billionaires?
So before I answer the senator's question, I just want anybody who's watching to know that, I'll put it bluntly, this is one of the baddest ass human beings serving here in the Senate. You have been a governor of a state with all the challenges. You are beloved. I've spent a lot of time in New Hampshire, folks. It's after New Jersey. It's one of my favorite new states. No disrespect to New Mexico over here on my right. But I love your state. I love the people of your state, and they love you. You are an extraordinary governor. You are a trailblazer, a glass ceiling breaker, a name taker. You are a badass. And to have served with you as my colleague, you have the kind of leadership in the Senate that is needed more of, somebody that stands in the middle and draws people together to common sense and pragmatism. I started on health care, some 16 so hours ago. And I read, you would be proud of me, because she's one of these voices that comes to me and says, hey, Cory, let's bring people together. I know that the presiding officer, who's new here, but he has the same spirit of trying to bring people together. And this might be the third time I've seen him in the chair over the last hours, 17 hours. Thank you, sir. But you whisper in my ear all the time, we've got to find a way to do this together. We've got to find a way to put more indivisible into this one nation under God. And so I hope that you would be proud, because I told my staff, who prepared with days preparing all these sections, from farming to environment, all the ways that Donald Trump is betraying his promises, betraying America, driving up costs, wrecking our economy, endangering us globally and here at home, and turning his back on a lot of our values, all while disrespecting this document more than any president that I've seen. But I wanted to make sure, I told the instructions to my staff, pull from all the Republicans you can. We want to use the Wall Street Journal. We want to use the Cato Institute. We want to bring this together, because what we're standing up here is not to talk about left or right. We're talking about what is right or wrong. I do not want to talk about this being a Democratic moment. It is a moral moment. And you are the perfect senator to be asking these questions about health care to me, because of what you stand for. You, when you got elected as governor twice, I think, when you got elected to the Senate here, you had to get votes from Democrats, independents, or Republicans, or you can't win in New Hampshire. I've been in your state. I've met the people. And God, you have a very participatory democracy up there. People feel like if you're not going north to south house parties, you have to engage directly with the people. They don't care what party you ascribe to. They want to feel you, see you. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's why I think you're such a badass leader. And so you would have been proud of me when I did the healthcare section, because I read from Republican governors and Democratic governors. 40 states expanded Medicaid, and all of these governors, all of these voices said exactly what you're intimating here is, do not let Donald Trump cut $880 billion out of Medicaid. It will crush rural hospitals. Yep. It'll crush level 1 trauma care centers. It'll crush organizations that deal with beautiful disabled children. It'll crush people who are struggling for health care. It'll crush nursing homes. It'll hurt red counties and blue counties. It will hurt America. Republican voices were saying that. And to have a bipartisan senator who embodies the spirit this place should ascribe to more, to say these things, is affirming the truth. Why? Why are they rushing to cut $880 billion, which voice after voice that I read said it would do so much damage to people's lives, so much damage to healthcare providers, so much damage to hospitals? Why? The only two things that will result from that is that they'll extend the Trump tax cuts, where the disproportionate benefits went to the wealthiest among us, who are doing better than they've ever done in this country. They don't need it. Taking money from struggling folks and giving it to them is not the answer. And then the other thing, to a person who, like me, when we were executives, you were a governor, I was a mighty mayor, we had to balance our budgets. Right. But they're not balancing the budget. They're not lowering the deficit. They're increasing it by trillions of dollars. This makes no sense to a pragmatic person who has balanced budgets, who expanded health care access, who made her state work, who has love and respect and votes, frankly, from Democrats and Republicans. You know this makes no sense. And so if you're standing up, and colleagues of mine further to the left of me, then why aren't other people why did only one Republican in the House vote against it? He told the truth. Massey. I see some of my Republican colleagues here. He's a fiscal hawk. He told the truth. This budget is going to explode the American national debt, stealing from future generations. I can't vote for this. He was not bullied like other people in the House into doing what dear leader Donald Trump says. And so, my colleague, you are on the money. I have internalized your voice. There's only a few people's voices I've internalized. One of them is my mother, but you're more my peer. You are one of those voices in America right now that we need, that does not slip into a partisan argument, but makes the pragmatic argument that what Donald Trump is trying to do with the aiding and abetting of congressional Republicans is wrong. It is fiscally wrong. It is morally wrong. It will hurt Americans. It is not for the common welfare. It's not for the common defense. Read the start of the Constitution, please. I beg of you. We all swore to uphold it. How do our founders begin? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the best blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity. Trillions of dollars of deficit doesn't secure the blessing of liberties, it endangers our country. The common welfare is this idea that everybody should have access to what makes us free. What makes us free is not having medical debt. What makes us free is not being chained to uncertainty and security that if someone in my family gets sick, I will not be afforded. Still, the majority, or close to the majority, of bankruptcies in the United States of America are people who can't afford their health care bills. We need to find better ways to expand access and not cut more people off. You know this, former governor. There are a number of states that have these things called triggers, automatic triggers, that if the funding for Medicaid reduces to covering 90% of the costs, what happens in those states? Boom. Medicare expansion goes offline. So if you don't even cut it $880 billion, maybe you say, we'll just do $250 billion of an axe. States are going to lose their expansion. People are going to suffer and get hurt. Why? You said it, you said it, and you said it. You and I are the two people that want to see entrepreneurs make money. You and I want to see small business people thrive. We don't hate rich people. We think that's great. It's often, not always, Donald Trump, it's often a sign of people in America using their ingenuity, applying it, and being successful. But you and I both know that the richest people in this country don't need more tax cuts. It is morally wrong. It is fiscally wrong. It is wrong in the name of God and America. How could we be doing this to ourselves?
Will the senator yield for another question?
I can't call you one of the baddest ass people I've ever worked with and not yield to your questions, but I have to read the words. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, thank you for yielding the question for a question while retaining the floor, and thank you for the very nice compliments. I do have a question for you about Social Security, and then I think another colleague of mine has additional questions. But look, as you know, you just talked about my wonderful state, New Hampshire. You also just talked about your mother, and I should just also let you know that my mother always made me memorize the preamble to the United States Constitution. So as I listened to you read it, I thought,
shots fired on the Senate floor. Where's the parliamentarian?
I hope my mom is watching.
Rule
right
19
now.
her.
But here's my question, and just by way of background. As you know, New Hampshire's a small state. It's a very rural state. And recently, the Trump-Musk forces have announced that they want to close a Social Security office in Littleton, New Hampshire. Now, Littleton, New Hampshire, that Social Security office, which takes applications and provides technical assistance for people who need Social Security or need Medicare or who have questions about their current coverage, right? It is the northernmost office in New Hampshire. So they closed that office, and now my folks in the North Country, and there are about 334,000 people in New Hampshire with Social Security, right? My people in the North Country will have to drive as far as 100 miles to go to another New Hampshire Social Security office. And meanwhile, of course, they're laying off people from Social Security offices, and they're making it harder to get assistance via the telephone, which, as you know, many people who are on Social Security find the telephone the easiest way to make a connection, get technical assistance. So Elon Musk has called Social Security a Ponzi scheme. He says he wants to cut $700 billion from Social Security and Medicare. So my question to you, as we're looking at a administration that says that it wants to make things more efficient, but is actually laying people off, closing offices, making it harder for people to actually connect with the Social Security office. My concerns, of course, are that this is just going to delay claims, delay coverage, make it harder for people to get on Social Security, because actually Trump and Musk want to cut Social Security. Trump said, of course, that he was going to protect it when he was running for office. But now he's letting Musk do his cuts. So, Senator Booker, can you speak to the ways in which seniors across the country count on Social Security benefits that they have paid into? Right? This is not charity. People pay into the Social Security system. They earn the benefit. And can you talk about the disastrous impacts if this administration takes benefits, Social Security, Medicare away from our seniors?
Earlier, or last night, I had a whole chapter on Social Security outlining not just what you said, my colleague, my friend, but stories from seniors. And some of them really got to me. They were hard to read through. I have to say, I had prepped this by reading a lot of them, but somehow on the floor, when I read about the woman who had Parkinson's, when I read about the person taking care of their elderly parents, a spouse with dementia, children with special needs, and Social Security, it helps a lot of folks, but here's the craziness of the Trump attacks on the Social Security Administration. First, he makes people insecure about it. My mom lives in this amazing senior home, Las Ventanas, in Las Vegas, Nevada. Most of the people there, first of all, I love them all for who they are, not their party affiliation, but it's more Republicans than Democrats. And the stories my mom tells me about just the worry that they or other people in their family have because of Elon Musk calling it a Ponzi scheme, of Donald Trump talking about utter lies from the highest post in the land during a joint address, savaging Social Security with lies that everybody from conservative papers to Democratic papers to left-leaning papers have all called out lie, 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 lie. There are not millions of people receiving false payments. They've insinuated so much insecurity that people were writing me letters talking about they're losing sleep. They have so much anxiety because they only live on their Social Security check. And Brother Howard Luckman, who I know, and I don't know what he was thinking when he said it, a billionaire talking about his mother-in-law. I don't know what you were thinking, Howard. I just don't understand it, how you're saying if she misses a payment, she's okay, but if people complain, they're probably fraudsters. Do you understand how many millions of Americans only have that as their only protection between poverty and destitution? That if they miss a payment, they can't make their rent, they can't buy food? And so they've created so much insecurity, so much fear, and I compared it, Governor, I compared it to the difference between an FDR and a Donald Trump. FDR knew people were suffering. They knew people were afraid, and he stood before the American public and didn't lie to them, didn't attack people, didn't demean people, didn't degrade people. He comforted people. He allayed their fears. He inspired them. You have nothing to fear but fear itself. What an opposite in leadership. And so, yeah, there are a lot of people who right now don't know, but then my colleague from Massachusetts comes in and makes the very clear point, the professor we have in our caucus, she makes a clear point. They've already done benefit cuts because when you close offices in rural areas that that person who is missing a check or has an issue, now they have to drive, how many miles? 100 miles. Now, what is that hardship to a senior? I got heard from people in their 90s. They already are having benefit cuts. The Wall Street Journal, I told you, I was trying to make you proud. I wanted to get as many sources from anybody that was more centered or right. And I read from the Wall Street Journal and said the customer service in Social Security is going from bad to worse. That was the title of the article. So they're already doing cuts. They're already launching, heaping insecurity on our seniors, heaping inconvenience on our seniors, heaping fear upon our seniors, heaping insecurity, making people lose sleep. This is wrong, 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 wrong. This is not a model of leadership. It's a model of cruelty and mean-spiritedness and hurting people. When is it enough, America? When is it enough that we say it may not be my grandmother that depends on that Social Security check, but I love America, and you cannot love Americans. You cannot love America. You cannot call yourself a patriot. Please listen to me. You cannot say you love this country and you're a patriot, because patriotism is love of country, but you can't love your country unless you love your countrymen and women. And love means that if somebody, some mother or grandmother is hurting, is afraid, that I'm going to stand up and do what I can to comfort them and fight for them. Because today it might be your grandmother, it might be your family with a disabled child. This is not right or left, it is right or wrong. This is not a partisan moment, it is a moral moment. Where do you stand? We started this by talking about John Lewis. It is time for good trouble, necessary trouble. Thank you, my friend. Even though you made fun of me for, in my tired state, not remembering the very important preamble to the Constitution.
Very well.
Thank you very much. That actually means I take your compliments because you don't give them abundantly or overly well, so thank you very much.
Senator yield for a question.
Heck no, not to you, not to you, not to you. Let me tell you, I have something to get off my chest about you. I woke up I woke up yesterday morning, and the first thing I did, now this shirt's all wrinkled and a little ripe, but the first thing I did is grab a gift from you. People don't get upset, ethics-wise. We're allowed to give each other's gifts. This was like, I don't know how much it cost, but you gave me, I was talking to you about traveling and how we have to pack bags and go all the time. And he said, you told me I travel with a steamer. And I pulled out this little steamer for this shirt that I'm wearing right now. You were one of the kindest, sweetest people I know. You're one of my closest friends here in the United States Senate. And I want to say something about you, because in this moment, if people are watching, I want people to go there. We had a conversation. You came to my office. It's always a sign of respect when you come to the senator's office. And you came to my office and we were talking about social media, and I was encouraging you, you were a little resistant, if you don't mind me outing you, to open up and get more on the platform. We were talking about ideas and talking about Social Security, talking about Medicare, Medicaid. You opened up to me, and I hope I'm not betraying confidences. And I asked you just like, what do you do? Like, you were such an amazing human being. You're one of the kindest people I know. I asked you, what do you do on your weekends? What do you do for fun? Let people see it. And then you kind of made me pause when you said, well, my mother's getting kind of old. It's getting older. I love her so much. And you said that my brothers, my siblings and I, we alternate weekends just spending time with our mother. It was one of the sweetest things I heard. And then I said to you, what do you do with your mom? And then you brightened up and you choked me up, you jerk, because you said, what I love to do with my mom is to dance with her in the kitchen. When we're in the kitchen making food or something, I just love sometimes to put on a song and we dance. I don't know why it struck me as beautiful, and this is what I hope people will do right now. I said, well, why don't you record that? And I didn't think you would do it, that you would ask her if you could do it, but you then put up one of the most beautiful videos I've ever seen from one of my colleagues of you and your mom in the kitchen. I think it's on your Instagram page. And I have looked at that video. I'm probably all the views right now of my colleague, this big United States senator, loving his mother so much. And we are talking about that. I've talked about this on the floor. Great nations respect their elders. They take care of them. One of my colleagues, when they asked me a question about Social Security, they reminded me of what it was. The greatest anti-poverty program in the history of America. That Social Security rescued millions of Americans from being in poverty. It virtually ended poverty, although the checks now are becoming meager and meager as prices are going up, more people are getting lower and lower towards poverty, and people who live on those checks live very austerely. But you're just this amazing guy that turns your own lived experience into greater and greater urgencies to fight for the people of New Mexico. So I did not want to yield for a question until getting that off my chest. You are my friend, you are my colleague, you are my brother, and more than you know it, you're my inspiration. So yes, I yield for a question while retaining the floor now. I feel like I have so much power here to yield to my colleagues who are often more eloquent. I'm like afraid of White House because he's one of the brainiest people in the Senate. But I'm now have the control. But for you, now that I've gotten this off my chest and hopefully embarrassed you, but maybe added a few more views to my favorite video, I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, Senator Booker, thank you. I won't be surprised if Mom's watching right now, so you're probably going to get some messages from her. But I want to thank my friend and colleague from the great state of New Jersey. You've been holding this space for the American people now for well over 17 hours. While we represent different parts of the country, Senator Booker, we have the same values. I learned from you the importance of treating people with respect and dignity. That's what we should all be talking about here today, every day. I've also learned a lot about grace from you. Now, I come to the floor to ask you a question about farmers. I think you and I both appreciate the long hours that farmers put in to take care of that soil, their families, the planning that goes into this, sowing seeds. Sometimes you have to do a little weeding to make sure that we're going to all benefit from the fruits of their labor. Now, having fresh food in a grocery store is not something that can be taken for granted. And for a lot of our constituents, I've had these conversations with nominees that have come before us when they ask me, well, why is someone just eating potato chips or Doritos from that local store? I'll educate them by saying that's the only store around.
Yes.
There's food deserts everywhere. But we could do something about that. We have programs in place that recognize the importance of getting someone a meal that needs that meal. Supporting our farmers out there to sow those seeds, to help them with their planting. But what I'm seeing right now, Senator Booker, is our farmers have been on the receiving end of these federal funds being taken away from the United States Department of Agriculture, these reckless tariffs that are hurting farmers and ranchers just as much as they're hurting anyone in America. Outbreaks, bird flu. People know what the cost of eggs are at the store now. And then they look into what's going on here, and there's this bird flu that's going around. And my constituents ask, well, why did the United States Department of Agriculture under Donald Trump fire the people, epidemiologists, that are responsible for containing this thing? It didn't make any sense to folks. I was in the Ag Committee earlier today, Senator Booker, and I was asking some questions to USDA. And I learned that on March 7th, 2025, under the Trump administration, the United States Department of Agriculture terminated the Local Food and Schools Program and the Local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement. And then they went further, and they also notified grant applicants on March 24th that the fiscal year 2025 competition for the Patrick Leahy Farm to School Grant Program is canceled. Why does this matter to farmers and ranchers and people back home? These programs allow food banks and schools and others to purchase food from our local farmers. Now, our local farmers aren't just making a decision on what seed's going to be planted so they can sell the lettuce next week. They start this a year going back. So when the United States Department of Agriculture a year ago started talking to these farmers and ranchers about what programs were going to be in place, and then these farmers responsibly went and found customers to sell their food, food banks, different groups around the country, they planned the rest of the year to be able to get that nutritious food into the bellies of people that need it most. That sounds like respect and dignity.
Yep.
What's not respectful is when the Trump administration gives them a few days' notice and pulls the rug from under them and cancels the program that's going to allow the food bank, their customer, to buy their food. What do the farmers have to do now across America? Now, it gets worse and worse. I won't go into all of it, Senator Booker, but here's one of the dirty little secrets. All of these programs that are being taken away from the American people, it's to find an extra dollar for this tax policy under Donald Trump that my constituents started calling back in 2017 the Trump tax scam.
Wow.
Right? Well, why are you calling it that? And they said, well, everyone promised me, I'm making less than the median income, making less than $80,000, which is a lot of money in New Mexico. Across America, median income there is a little lower. I was told that we were going to get the brunt of this tax cut, recognizing that we're hardworking and how hard it is to make ends meet. But that's not what happened. Most of this went to families and folks making over $2.8 million. I don't have anything against those families. I wish them well. I want them to make more, $10 million next year. But they don't need a tax cut. That should be one of those hardworking families that were told that they were being prioritized, but they're the ones that told me anyway, that this was a Trump tax scam. That's the secret. That's where all this money's going. So, Senator Booker, whether I'm in a grocery store and I'm chatting with constituents, we're out there looking at egg prices or whatever it may be, they're concerned about what's going on here, and all they're asking for me to share with my colleagues here is just tell them to tell us the truth.
Yes.
If they're going to vote to take these programs away, they have the votes by Republican colleagues. Just be honest. Treat my constituents with the respect and dignity so that they can plan. So that a single mom that has a child whose Medicaid may get ripped away, but that child has cancer, how are they going to plan for care in 6 months? So that farmer who started planting seeds recently but was planning over a year on what to do so they could find another customer so that they're not going to lose that farm as well. Now, before I ask you this question, sir, I want to end with this. Senator Booker, you often share a story of Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address, his second, and the man whose reviewed mattered most to the 16th President of the United States.
One of my favorite stories.
When asked his opinion of Lincoln's performance, former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass replied, "It was a sacred effort." Let me be the first to say this is a sacred effort, Senator Booker, and I'm proud to stand alongside you. So, Senator Booker, the question that my constituents and I have for you is, can the farmers and ranchers of America afford to pay for another Trump tax scam with all this nonsense that's going on? I mean, it's a question I get when I'm at church. I say not during church, but after church is okay.
Yeah.
Or at the grocery store. But when I'm visiting with folks back home, this is what they're asking me.
And thank you for the question. You said it, the same words that literally, I didn't write these words, my staff wrote this little paragraph here. Trump is pulling the rug from out from under producers that need stability and reliable markets. Because you and I sit, right by each other in the Ag Committee, and we see this connection that you so beautifully say, this idea that we are separate from each other, the invisible lines that divide us in this country are bunk compared to the strong ties that bind us. That farmer producer in a rural neighborhood is deeply connected to the person in my community. And I live in an inner city, Newark, New Jersey. There is a powerful spiritual connection. And you talk to that farmer, and they've got pride that they're feeding America. And they have pride in the ground. You described it so beautifully. They have pride in their soil. They want to be stewards of the land, and they want to create a vibrant American food system. And they rely on people that empower them in that process and don't pull the rug out from under them, drag back contracts, cut programming, especially not those programs that help them get fresh fruits and vegetables, healthy foods to food banks. You talk to the food banks. they'll attest that families, how grateful they are for that fresh fruits and vegetables. You said it right. Parents want the best quality food for their kids. But this food system is killing them. And when I heard the new Secretary of HH&S talk about, hey, we need to get greater access to fresh, healthy foods. Food is medicine. Things I've been saying for years. And what do when they get in there? They cut the very programs that help our farmers and get fresh fruits and vegetables to kids to deal with chronic disease. How could you say out of one side of your mouth, Trump, oh, I'm going to let the Maha people go their way, and then the first thing you do is cut the programs that help kids get healthy, nutritious foods? It makes no sense. It makes no economic sense. It hurts our farmers. It hurts our farm workers. It hurts our end users. It's not fair, and I appreciate your question, sir. Thank you.
Would the senator from New Jersey yield for a question?
Let me think about this for a second.
You take your time thinking about it, sir.
I want to thank Senator Whitehouse. He's been a colleague and a friend for a long time, and he stands right there at that desk for very long speeches. I think I'm trying to go a long time. You go a consistency of times, and you've talked about the climate crisis, you've talked about the Supreme Court scams. You've not only educated members in this body on these issues, you've educated America. You are a YouTube star now, and I learn from you every time I hear you speak. So I'm a little worried right now, but I'm going to step out on faith and yield for a question while retaining the floor.
So, first question. It's been 17 hours. How you doing?
I shall not complain. I shall not complain, but thank you for checking in on me, my friend.
Yeah, well, thank you for what you're doing. Second question, if you would yield for a second question without yielding the floor.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
One of the ways in which I try to discuss what's going on in this country when people are horrified, anxious, astonished, whatever, is to describe it as the rule of the looters and the polluters. The looters are the creepy billionaires coming to government, trying to figure out how to get even more for themselves. It used to be that people thought that there was a thing too rich to steal. That doesn't seem to be a thing for these creepy billionaires. They're more than happy to wreck Social Security so that they can send in their tech bros and their private equity folks to put right what they have broken. And the looting goes on across the entire face of government, scarred and disfigured by Musk and his little Musk rats, I like to call them. And then, of course, you've got the polluters who are doing a similar thing, which is to steal from the public, only instead of stealing through government, they're stealing by dumping their pollution into our common air, into our common climate future, into our waters, into our lands, and defending through political influence and clout and power and dark money in this building their privilege to pollute for free. And the end point of both of those is regular Americans who are getting, to put it bluntly, pretty hosed, so that people on the other side of that, the creepy billionaires who are behind the climate denial scheme, who are out to wreck the American government so that it can't regulate their conduct or make them behave like honest bankers and investors or insurers or whatever, react for a moment, if you would, to that framing of our beautiful country now being subject to the really malevolent whims of the big looters and the big polluters.
Well, first of all, I will say to you that I meet wealthy people like a group called the Patriotic Millionaires who advocate for progressive tax policy and are the first to say and speak out against this tax scam. I don't, again, it's, to me, what does patriotism mean to you? Patriotism, by definition, means love of country. If you don't love your fellow countrymen and women, how do you love your country? And so what would you do I actually know what you would do. I don't even have to answer this question. If somehow you came into $1 billion or more dollars, you would not be asking for more. You would literally say, wait a minute, Republican Congress, wait a minute, Donald Trump, what you're trying to do is take away health care from expectant mothers, from disabled children, from seniors, in order to give me more tax credit? I would think that the patriotic thing to do, that the thing in love, you would say, Donald Trump, go screw yourself.
If the senator would yield for another question while retaining the floor.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I would add to your comment and request your response to the observation that not only is this an appalling manifestation of greed by people who already have more money than they're able to spend in their entire lifetimes, but the manner in which they are accomplishing their purpose is pretty loathsome in and of itself. Because the manner in which they are accomplishing their selfish purposes is to corrupt and degrade this great American democracy that we are all here to defend.
Yes.
And they do it by taking their billions and running it through phony front groups, so it pops up as dark money in elections. And of course, the beneficiary of the dark money, the candidate, figures out exactly who's behind the big dark money contribution that ends up in the super PAC that is supporting them. And of course, the big donor knows that they gave the money. So the deal between the creepy billionaire and the in hoc to them political candidate is made. But because it's dark money, because it's secret, because it goes through front groups and into the super PAC and ultimately into the campaign, courts don't know, public doesn't know, voters don't know. Everybody else is left out of the joke.
Yes.
And so, bad enough that they're here arguing for excess benefits for themselves compared to regular Americans. Worse, they're using dark money corruption to get there. So how is that patriotic?
I want to answer this question so badly, but the crazy thing is the person best to answer this question is the person who asked it. You have sat here and given this detailed analysis to show how this group of very wealthy billionaires in this country are so perverting our system by creating these front groups that then interfere in our democracy in the most disgusting of ways. Even if you are like me and you that can't stand the decision Citizens United, even in Citizens United, the majority opinion really projected that we should do the Disclose Act, which we have tried to bring to this floor and get passed, that says no more dark money. How do we have a political system that is so corrupted by billionaires who with all of their money, drown out the voices and politics of other Americans? A great example of that is they're getting so reckless that many billionaires aren't even hiding it anymore, i.e. Elon Musk. He's like saying, hey, I'm going to roll up into a Supreme Court case up in one of our best Great Lakes states. And I'm just going to dump $100 million there and then give away, as if to insult our democracy, $1 million checks as part of my effort to influence an election with my overwhelming flood the zone amount of billions of dollars. And by the way, hey, it's a pretty good investment, right? I'm Donald Trump's biggest campaign contributor, and as soon as he gets elected, a lot of my stock goes up, although Tesla stock isn't doing so great right now. The reality is, we live in a country right now that we're giving more and more ability for billionaires to use their wealth to rig the system and then get more wealth as a result of that. It is so corrupt and so corrupting to this. We have been talking about this, as you said, for 18 hours now. This big, unchecked corporate contributions, billionaire dollars, dark money in front organizations that nobody in the Senate has outlined better than you, is corrupting our Constitution, and even the bad case Citizens United Even they said this shouldn't happen. You all should write laws in this place that force people to disclose where that money's coming from. But how many years has it been since Citizens United? Many. And how many times have we failed? 15? Guys, I don't know, and I'm so grateful for this man, because all my colleagues who are assembled here know, doggedly and determinedly, you have stood right there with charts and graphs. You've outlined it ad nauseum. They've attacked you because your truth is so threatening to them that more people will know about how big money is corrupting democracy. And so how many assaults are we going to have to watch in 71 days when we now have a president that can create a meme coin? Isn't there something here, my great constitutional scholar, a big word called emoluments? This president has basically created a meme coin where we now know, hard to trace this, that millions of dollars have been put into his pocket. I have my team reading about it right now. Foreign countries, Russian oligarchs, incredible Arab wealth. You want to pay off the Donald Trump? You know, because his government is being run like this. It's not JFK. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. You've seen how he's behaved. It's ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for Donald Trump. That's how he does business. How do we know that? Look at the evidence of the last 71 days. If you are a law firm that comes to him and offers him $40 million of pro bono work, God, how many people I love in Newark had that kind of legal representation, pro bono. He is beating you up, threatening to ruin your business until you come to him and tell him what you're going to do for him. We're seeing it. You want a merger? You want a merger? What do? Give $1 million to his inaugural committee, and then find ways to get money to him through his meme coin, kowtow to him in any way possible. Senator Whitehouse, nobody has outlined this more than I have. Nobody, more than you have, excuse me. And I encourage people, I feel like now I'm advertising everywhere, social media. Go to his YouTube. I call him a YouTube star. I'm not joking. You have on YouTube, I know, just great details and outline about how the corruption of money in politics is getting worse and worse and worse in this era of billionaires like Elon Musk who have no shame anymore. And I'm going to say it on the Senate floor. There are so many reports and stories of him threatening elected leaders, threatening to put $100 million in a primary challenge if they don't kowtow to what the great leader is telling them to do. This is, you use the word all the time, and I'm going to say it over and over. This is corrupting to our democracy and amounts to another assault on our Constitution. How much will we take, America, until we say enough, until we say no more, until we say pass the Disclose Act? Bring back the dark money, put light on it, shine the light of truth on this web of dark money lies. How long will we endure this? I hope that you and I are in the Senate when you no longer have to give that speech, because we took action on the Senate floor to end this nightmare of billionaires trying to outsize influence in our democracy.
Will the senator yield for a question?
Not immediately. I just want to say to Patty Murray, thank you. You were a co-conspirator in my life of trying to cause good trouble. You are one of the most powerful people in the United States Senate, yet you have never lost your compassion and your care for people. You're like somebody else I talked about in the Senate, two of my favorite people who lives this ideal that I may be a United States Senator, I may be head of appropriations, I may be President pro tem of the Senate, but I will never lose my connection to the people I represent and to the convictions that brought me to this place. You are such an honorable soul, you're such a great American, and you've been such a dear friend to me, this Congress. I savor the times where you let me come to you're a lot more seniority than me. You've got a great hideaway with a view. One day, maybe. But I just want to say thank you, Patty Murray, for being so kind to me. And you're showing up right now gives me a lot of strength, puts more fuel in my tank. And so now I feel all this power. Now you outrank me in every imaginable way here, and you're the head of our Democrat appropriations, so I'm obligated by the state of New Jersey to be very obsequious to you. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, I thank the senator from New Jersey. Thank you for your kind words. And I would just say the country is so grateful for what you are doing right now, because so many people are so frightened, worried, scared, and angry about what is happening to the basic values of this country that so many people have just thought would be there, that their kids would be able to go to school and get an education and not have to worry that the Department of Education was going to be gone and there wasn't a watchdog anymore or somebody to help them, or that the research at NIH was going to be dismantled. Perhaps they had a family member who was in the middle of some kind of scientific experiment that is now being dismantled. What happens to their hope? I hear from people on so many topics, seniors who are waiting on hold for hours and then getting hung up on because there's nobody to answer the phone anymore. These are basic values that we have as a country, that we care for other human beings, and we're there as a country for them. And you are showing that fight today and inspiring so many people, and I will ask you a question in a minute, but I want to personally thank you for what you are doing today. It is so important. You are the voice of so many people today, and I so appreciate it. Now, I want to change the dynamic a little bit. I wanted to come today. You have talked about the impact in so many areas in our country, but I wanted to come and ask you about something really personal to me, and that is the impact on our veterans today. The senator may not know this, but when I came to the Senate many years ago, I asked to be on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I was the first woman ever to ask to be on the Veterans Committee. And the reason for me was very personal. As you may know, my dad was a World War II veteran, and my family relied on his VA care when he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. But I also, when I was in college during the Vietnam War, many of my friends and colleagues were on the streets demonstrating, and my heart was out to them, but I was thinking about those men and women my age who were going over to Vietnam and coming back and injured in many different ways. So I actually did my college internship. I asked to be at the Seattle VA. And I went to the Seattle VA during the Vietnam War and served on what was the psychiatric ward at the time. And I sat and worked with young men and women who were my age, in college age, who'd been sent there and came back with severe mental health impacts. Now, today we call that PTSD, but at the time we didn't know it. And I was looking at these men and women who volunteered to go over, or sometimes their number came up at the time, and came home and were going to be impacted the rest of their lives. And I learned firsthand what it means when somebody says, I will go for my country to fight for all of you, so that you have that America that you've been talking about here for you when you get home. And our promise to each and every one of them was, if you serve your country in the military, we will take care of you when you get home. That is a promise I hold near and dear to my heart, which is why I asked to be on the Veterans Committee when I first came here, first woman ever. And I will tell you, I've seen the impact time and time again. I go home and I hold town halls when I was newly here, and there'd be a lot of veterans who'd come and talk to me and tell me what's going on, what needed to be fixed. But always at that time, I will share with my colleagues, women never said anything. There were a few always in the back of the room, and it wasn't until the regular meeting was over and they'd come up quietly to me and say, I need to tell you what's happening to women veterans. I need to share with you sexual assault. I need to share with you that there's not the facilities. I go to the VA, and it's a men's only kind of place. There's no OBGYNs. There's nobody to do mammographies. And I often don't feel comfortable sitting in that waiting room with a whole lot of people after I have had the experiences that I've had, and there's no place for women to go. So we've worked really hard to make sure the VA works for women. We've worked really hard to make sure the VA addresses the issues of today. The PACT Act that we worked so hard to make sure that men and women who were victims of a toxic exposure overseas, got the services they need. I could speak for 2 hours here about all the things we've done. But then I see what this administration is doing to those men and women who we asked as a country to serve overseas or to here at home, in service of all of us and the promises we've made them. And I think, what are they doing? They're undermining the very value that all of us have given to Americans who serve above and beyond. So when I hear of 2,000 layoffs a few weeks ago, I go, wow, where's that coming from? Well, I know because I'm getting the phone calls, like I'm sure you are, from a VA researcher who has been taken off the job, fired, unexplained, told he wasn't doing a good enough job somehow, doing research on basic things like prosthetics, or doing basic research on PTSD, or doing basic research on the kinds of things that our men and women who serve overseas are subjected to and need to come home and have the specialized service and resources that they need. Or I hear from veterans who can't get the services that they've been asked for. So now when we are hearing this administration is about to cut 80,000, you didn't hear me wrong, 80,000 more people from the VA, a vast majority themselves are veterans. I wanted to ask the senator, how does that hit you? How do you feel about that?
I'm so grateful you brought this up. And especially all the work we had to do when I got elected 12, 13 years ago. One of the earliest things I did is meet with women and veterans in my state and heard these awful stories about how long it took to get gynecological care, the waits that they had to do, the indignities they had to endure. And I'm glad we've made so many strides, in part thanks to your leadership in New Jersey, with special dedicated facilities to our women veterans, with shortening those wait times, with prioritizing them. But you're now right. Their proposal is to cut 83,000 positions from the VA. And you know this, you said it, this just years ago, this governing body passed the PACT Act with overwhelming bipartisan support. It was signed by President Biden in August of 2022, the largest health care and benefit expansion in VA history. You were one of the leaders, increasing disability compensation and extending eligibility for VA care. To meet this increased demand, the VA added 61,000 employees. In 2023. These new hires included claim processors, physicians, nursing staffs, medical support assistants, food service workers, and housekeeping staff. And now the progress this body made is in jeopardy by this president. We added 61,000 just to keep up with the demands and the needs, and now he's cutting 83,000. This is an article, if you don't want me to yield. DAV urges Veteran Affairs to be more transparent about vet care amid layoffs and budget cuts. Veteran Affairs Secretary Doug Collins says veterans' care won't be impacted. We saw the largest expansion of VA healthcare benefits in a generation under the PACT Act. Collins attended DAV's recent midwinter conference where he came from behind the podium, walked into the audience, and told attendees that vet care and benefits would not be impacted by the Trump administration. In recent appearances on CBS Eye on Veterans podcast, DAV Communications Chief and Air Force veteran Dan Clare said the VA has not demonstrated how it's going to keep its promise. They have not demonstrated it. DAV also does not have a lot of information about what's planned, he said. Can you imagine that? Leaving all these veterans with insecurity and uncertainty. Now we're hearing about the 83,000 people losing their jobs. 20,000 or so folks might be veterans themselves. We're concerned about how we're going to be able to cut that many people and maintain care and benefits. The VA hired thousands of staffers since 2022 in response to the PACT Act, which brought 800,000 new enrollees into its systems. Collins has said cutting the VA workforce by 83,000 would bring it back down to its 2019 level before we did all those expansions to help women's vets. Clare said he has not heard about specific performance problems with those who've been laid off. Well, you haven't heard about it. Veterans' needs have not changed, and they remain great. The people who are sick from the burn pits didn't necessarily get better overnight, and some of these folks are going to have a long road to hoe when it comes to their health. DAV is getting calls frequently from veterans who are scared, angry, and don't understand what's going on, and how it's going to affect them. Claire was one of the first whistleblowers on burn pits in Iraq, which eventually inspired the fight to pass the PACT Act to help veterans who became sick or even died from their toxic exposures. When we started talking about dioxin, when Vietnam veterans heard that, they immediately thought of Agent Orange. And that's probably what this is, our generation's Agent Orange. There's a lot of decisions being made behind closed doors, he continued. We want to know what the plan is. We want to know what the plan is. We're not against efficiency of government. We're not against even removing VA employees who may not be fit performers. A veteran has a unique understanding of another veteran's needs, Claire continued. When you lose those folks out of the VA, the veterans, you lose an institutional capacity to understand veterans. It is also unclear how these cuts will impact VA research, which Claire also stressed has helped veterans deal with complex issues that are service-connected, such as traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress. In addition to being concerned about how recent budget cuts and staff reductions will impact veterans care and caregivers, Claire said DAV is also concerned about the impact on veteran-owned small businesses. DAV is asking veteran business owners whose contracts have been recently canceled or who have been fired from their VA jobs to reach out here. DAV is actively keeping a list of veterans negatively affected by the Trump administration's cuts and plans on fighting for them in the weeks and months to come. And those lists that they're keeping are getting longer and longer and longer of people affected by this. So to answer your question, it's absurd. It is offensive. It's ready, fire, aim. Tens of thousands of veterans laid off, veterans who do business and work in contracts ended. Why is this another group that the President of the United States is scaring? Frightened veterans, angry veterans. I'm hearing from them in my state. I know you're hearing them from yours. What's the plan? What's the plan? What's the plan? They have no answer for us. All they're doing is cutting Social Security staff, undermining the delivery of those services, they're cutting the VA services. And why, by the way? Is it creating efficiency or effectiveness? No. Is it to create savings? Because we got to create savings to give more of those tax cuts to billionaires like Elon Musk. It is not fair. It is not right. When we send people off into the most dangerous environments on the planet Earth and ask them to put their lives on the lines for us, the least we can do as a nation is not penny pinch on their backs of the service that they deserve.
For one additional question.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
The senator's right. And so many veterans are afraid right now. And I had a veteran tell me that he was one of those people that got the letter, you haven't performed well. He worked for the National Park Service, actually. And he said, I've been saving lives. I've been cleaning trails. I've been making sure that the national parks are safe for all of you. And then he said to me, I'm a veteran. I served in the war. And I served my country there because I wanted to serve my country and my fellow Americans. And I came home and worked for the National Park Service to do the same. And now, as a veteran, my country's not there for me. And I would just say to my colleague and to everyone who's listening, to these men and women, that we make a promise to, that we say we will be there for you when you come home. That does not mean slamming a door in your face. It doesn't mean that you have to wait for hours to get the services that you earned. It doesn't mean that you will be mistreated. It means that we will honor you. And I would thank the senator for his response and just say to him again, do you think we're treating men and women in this country as great Americans by the actions that are being taken by this administration?
Thank you for the question. No, and I'm just going to read another article that's going to make even clearer the point you just laid that's so strong and so important. This is from Axios, How White House Firings Are Hurting Veterans. The Trump administration's big cuts to the federal government are hitting one group particularly hard, the country's veterans. Why it matters? Many of those who served in the military derive a sense of purpose and belonging from their government work, viewing it as a way to serve their country and help their peers outside of active duty. The big picture. It's not clear yet how many vets have been fired or will be. Last year, veterans made up 28% of the federal workforce, 28%. Per federal data, a far bigger share than the 5% in the private sector. About 36% of the vets working in civil service, more than 200,000 in total, are disabled or have serious health conditions per federal data. 36% of the vets working in civil service are disabled vets. This is the largest attacks on veteran employment in our lifetime, says William Attig, Executive Director of the Union Veterans Council, a large group that represents many of these workers. Attig, who was deployed in Iraq from 2003 to 2009, has been talking to newly unemployed members trying to get a tally of everyone whose job was lost. Zoom in now. Some veterans still holding on to their jobs for now are waiting for the hammer to drop. We're being smeared as leeches, but I just want to serve my country and provide for my family, an employee at the Department of Defense who's a disabled veteran, and requested anonymity because he didn't want to put his job at risk. Talk about free speech. We're being smeared as leeches, says a disabled veteran who stood for us. And he was thrilled to land his job, he said a few months ago, but is anxiously waiting to see if he'll be one of the more than 5,000 workers at the Pentagon that the Pentagon said it would fire next week. Privately now, GOP lawmakers are growing uneasy with the cuts to veterans. I know this because I know the heart of so many of my Republican colleagues. Politico reports adding that vets have been disproportionately affected by firings, and again, GOP lawmakers are growing uneasy about it. The White House did not say how many veterans have been fired. At least one department, the Department of Interior, has rapidly carved out an exception for him. President Trump has consistently stood up for our brave men and women, delivering crucial reforms that improve VA health care, said White House spokesperson Anna Kelly in an email. There are a few reasons government work attracts vets. The federal government has a veterans preference. Put simply, when deciding among a group of qualified candidates, they're first in line. I think that's right. You'd have to jump through a lot of hoops to not hire a veteran, said a former official. With more veterans working in government, more feel welcome to work among people who understand them. Others are drawn to their retirement benefits. Years of military service counts towards your federal pension. Plus, though, many of these folks feel drawn to mission-driven employment. Most veterans feel like they're putting on another uniform when they go work in other federal agencies. These jobs are a crucial piece of the puzzle in most military life, he says, adding that it's also a key part of suicide prevention for this at-risk group. One of the most important things you can do for a veteran is help them with a job. How can we expect to maintain what is in America an all-volunteer force if we fail to show those folks willing to serve how we care for our service members when they come home? Slashing more than 83,000 jobs from the VA alone, it's clear that these cuts are going to have a disproportionate impact on veterans, veteran contractors, and the services they receive. I'm angry about these cuts, but most of all, it should make all Americans feel a sense of sadness. We ask our veterans to sacrifice so much, and we all know, who know veterans, it's not just the veterans, it's also veteran families that make that sacrifice, that share in that service, that share in that commitment. And these veterans, some of the more talented, dedicated leaders I know, they're not doing it for the money. They're doing it because they're called to serve. You know how many people jumped into service after 9/11? Friends of mine rushed to join the military, to serve in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now they're home, many of them with invisible wounds, many of them with visible wounds. And the services they rely on for their health care, the services they rely on as lifelines, the services they rely on often that give them hope and opportunity, not compounding their trauma. This is now being attacked by a president who's not keeping his promises. He says he values veterans, but the facts are different. She devoted her life to serving the U.S., then DOGE targeted her. It has been 6 days since Joy Marver was locked out of her office at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, 5 days since she checked herself into hospital for emergency psychiatric care, and 2 days since she sent a letter to her supervisors, "Please, I'm confused. Can you help me understand?" Now, she followed her wife into the storage room of their house outside of Minneapolis, searching for answers no one could give her. A half dozen bins held the remnants of 22 years spent in service to the U.S. government, first as a sergeant first class in Iraq, then as a disabled veteran, and finally as a VA support specialist in logistics. She devoted her career to a system that had always made sense to her, but now nobody seemed to know whether she had officially been laid off, or for how long, or even why. "Are you sure you never got an email?" asked her wife, Mickey Jo Carlson, 49. "How would I know?" asked Maver, 45. "They deleted my account." "Maybe it's because you were still probationary." "My boss said I was exempt," Marver said. "I was supposed to be essential." In the last few months, more than 30,000 people across the country were fired by President Trump's new initiative called the Department of Government Efficiency, a historic reduction of the federal workforce that has been all the more disruptive because of its chaotic execution. Entire agency divisions have been cut without explanation or mistakenly fired and then rapidly rehired, resulting in several lawsuits and mass confusion among civil workers. After a court ruled last week that many of the firings were illegal, the government began reinstating workers even as the Trump administration appealed the decision and promised more layoffs. The VA alone said it planned to cut about 80,000 more jobs this year, including tens of thousands of veterans. And for Marver, the shock of losing her job was eclipsed by the disorientation of being repeatedly dismissed and belittled by the government she served. She had watched on TV as Trump's billionaire advisor, Elon Musk, took to the stage at a political conference wielding a chainsaw to the beat of rock music, slicing apart the air with what he called his chainsaw for bureaucracy. She had listened to Trump's aides and allies deride federal employees for being lazy, parasitic, unaccountable, and essentially wasting taxpayer money in their quote-unquote fake jobs. In Marver's case, that job had meant helping to retrain soldiers for civilian work and coordinating veteran burials while earning a salary of $53,000 a year. "Here's the note I got a little while after I was hired," Marver told Carlson, pulling a form letter from the government. "You represent the best of who we are as Americans," it read. "You could have chosen to do anything with your talents, but you chose public service. Kind of boilerplate, but it's nice," Carlson said.
Madam Chair. Senator Booker, will you yield for a question?
Before I yield, I just want to acknowledge my friend in the chair, and she's cracking a tight whip, so I appreciate you following the rules here. I got to read this now, and then I'm eager to get your question because you are one of the few people I knew before I got to the Senate.
That is what I wanted to talk about.
Well, I'm sorry. I didn't yield. I didn't yield for a question.
I'm sorry.
You can't say anything, sir.
Oh.
The parliamentarian will jump all over you. I have the floor. So much power, it's going to my head.
Senator, will you yield for a question?
Oh, man. Known you for like 25 years. I wanted to talk about you, but you're being so insistent. I'll reward your insistence and say I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
And let me ask you, Senator Booker, I can't ask you now, through the chair, let me ask you directly how long a question you would like. Would you have I'm happy to provide you with a 5-minute question or a 5-hour question. It depends entirely on
I actually believe that you would go a 5-hour question to try to help me power through. Senator,
as you know,
we've been at this for...
My wife, Susan, would
I love your wife, Susan. I love you and your wife, Susan, but I love your children more. Your girls are
that's why I came down here. You know, when I remember
Is this a question? Because I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
This is a question, please.
Okay, let's make it a 7-minute question.
This is a question. And I would say to the senator from New Jersey and to the presiding officer, thank you very much for being here and for enduring this. When I started here, I was sitting in the chair all the way to the right of where you are today, Senator Booker. And I can remember the day you walked in to be sworn in, you came through those doors right there, and I had a huge smile on my face because I knew when you were walking through those doors, when you were walking into this chamber, you would bring with you the kids that you used to work for in Newark, New Jersey. And the reason I knew that was that when you were working for the kids in Newark, New Jersey, as the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, I was working for the kids in Denver as the superintendent of the Denver Public Schools. And at that time, in our country's history, we were engaged in a pretty profound effort to try to make better the schools in our respective communities. Not that everything was perfect, but we were trying to drive achievement for the kids in Newark and the kids in Denver, and we talked about it over many years. And here you walked into this chamber, a place where it would be easy to imagine has long had the habit of treating America's kids like they're someone else's kids, not like they're America's kids. I know that because if the kids in America were represented by the 100 desks that are in this Senate, roughly 9 of them would be graduating with a college degree in our country. 9 of these desks. If we thought about the rates of literacy, the failure in our country to be able to teach people how to read or do mathematics, decade after decade after decade, the proficient students would consume just a few desks in this place, and everybody else would not be able to do basic levels of reading and basic levels of math. And but here you were, somebody who understands that, and here you are, somebody who understands that. And one of the very first projects you and I worked on, this is coming to my question, was the child tax credit. This was an effort to turn back 30 or 40 years of trickle-down economics that said that what we're going to do is cut taxes for the richest people in the country and just have it trickle down to everybody else. Some people don't know what that means, and if I could, let me just say what that actually means. For you to understand what that tax policy is, that tax policy that Donald Trump has pursued now twice, once when he was president before, and now again, you have to imagine that there is a mayor in Newark, or there is a mayor in Denver, or a mayor in San Diego, or in Miami, who is saying to the people that live in his community, I have an idea. I'm going to go out and borrow more money than we have ever borrowed before as a community. I'm going to go out and borrow a ton of money. And your constituent and my constituents would say, wait a minute, Mayor, wait a minute, that makes me nervous. What are you borrowing all that money for? Because I'm worried about the fiscal condition of my city and my town. This conversation would happen in every city and every town in Colorado or New Jersey, whether they're Democratic or Republican mayors. You'd have to answer the question, what are you spending the money on? What are you going to borrow all this money for? Is it for our parks? No. Is it for our schools? No. Is it to give mental health services to kids who desperately need it? No. Is it for our roads and bridges, our infrastructure? No. Are you going to do something important for our water systems? No. What is the answer? What are you going to do with that money that you are borrowing, that you are mortgaging our kids' future? What is this important thing that you're going to do with it? The answer is we're going to give it to the 2 richest neighborhoods in New Jersey or Newark or Denver, and we're going to expect that it's going to trickle down to everybody else. That is the theory. That is what trickle-down economics is. That is what the Trump tax plan is, and there's a reason why no mayor in America has ever done it because you would be run out on a rail. Because you couldn't explain it. You're going to borrow money from the kids of our police officers, our firefighters, our teachers, in order to cut taxes for the richest people in the community in the hope that they'll buy a little bit of an extra, I don't know, luxury, and that's going to somehow generate economic activity for everybody else. It is demonstrably true that that has never worked. And by the way, these tax cuts, I say the presiding officer and everybody else within the sound of my voice, have literally never, ever come close to paying for themselves. That is a complete lie. That's why the Congressional Budget Office says this is going to blow a $4.6 trillion hole in our deficit. And for what? To give tax cuts to the richest people in America when they need them least? And when the income inequality is as great as it has been in our country since the 1920s, which brings me to my question. My cherished colleague from New Jersey, what was it we were trying to do with the child tax credit? There were a lot of people who believed that we couldn't even get it passed, that we couldn't even get the IRS to administer it. And then we did get it passed during part of the Biden administration, and lo and behold, more than 90% of the families in New Jersey got a tax cut. Lo and behold, more than 90% of the families in Colorado got a tax cut, not waiting for a trickle down from the wealthiest people, but they got a tax cut directly that did what? Cut in half the childhood poverty rate in America. In the richest country in the world, for one moment, we said, we don't have to accept this level of childhood poverty as a permanent feature of our democracy or a permanent feature of our economy. We can do something different than that. And Senator Booker, that is what you said when you were mayor of Newark. We don't have to accept these generational outcomes of poverty or of poor schools or of lead in the water. We can do something different, and that's what you've brought to the United States Senate as well. The tragedy from my perspective is there are many tragedies about the election of Donald Trump, and by the way, I'll say again on this floor, I don't blame him for getting elected president. You know, he ran and he won. Those of us that were trying to offer a different vision have something to explain about why we were not successful. The one thing I am certain of is that the kids in Newark and the kids in Denver are completely invisible to our current president. That he is not concerned with their welfare or even loses a minute's sleep over the next generation. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, this isn't a numbers and cents question, because I know even though you don't look tired, I'm sure you must be tired after all these hours and hours and hours, but can you talk a little bit, Senator, about how a society should be judged with respect to how we treat the next generation of Americans, how a tax bill should be judged by how we treat the next generation of Americans, how almost nothing else matters except what we do with respect to the next generation of Americans. I can tell you that my daughters, Caroline, Helena, and Ann, understand better than most your commitment to them and to your commitment to their generation, because you've been such an inspiration to them, not just today, but thank you for what you're doing, but for basically their entire lifetimes.
Well, thank you for the question. My long time friend, one of the folks I've known the longest, who I get to serve with, and what you did for me when I came here is you and Sherrod Brown, who sat right there by the door, you let Bennett and Brown become Bennett Brown Booker, 3 Bs, and joined together with some of the most extraordinary House members and Brother Warnock, and fight for the child tax credit. And it took years, but we found our opening when we called Ron Klain together before the election was even settled and said, please, this is the best thing our country can do is to expand the child tax credit and make it fully refundable. Because we knew, as you said, it would give the overwhelming majority, between 80 and 93%, depending on what state you are, of the people in those states, we expanded the earned income tax credit, it would give them all a tax break. It was, inarguably, one of the greatest tax cuts in the last 50 years. And it cut child poverty in America nearly in half. And child poverty is a moral obscenity. Child poverty is violence against children. Violence. And here's the thing that you and I both know from the research. Every dollar you spend in raising a child above the poverty line, you return to society between $5 and $7 in economic growth and activity, or in lesser costs, because kids above the child poverty line have, for example, less visits to the emergency room. I just don't understand how we are a nation, again, the wealthiest nation that has one of the highest child poverty rates. It makes no sense, 0 sense. When we proved once and for all with that 1-year effort, because we couldn't make it permanent, we were short 1 vote in this body, we proved forever in America that child poverty is a policy choice, not an inevitable reality. And so you ask the great question, why in a nation that was founded on men that studied virtue, the ideals of virtue, they were imperfect geniuses, but they really struggled with moral philosophy. We have the power, we've proven it, to cut child poverty in half. What's the argument against it? Wasteful spending? Come on, come on. Giving trillions of dollars of tax cuts to the wealthiest in America, I'm sorry, it's wasteful spending, especially if it ends up blowing a hole. Those tax cuts don't pay for themselves. Trump won tax cuts, didn't. Renewing them won't. Doing the same thing over and over again and thinking you're going to get different results is the very definition of insanity. You are one of the most passionate. I remember a stem winder of a speech you gave in this body. You were so angry. I love it when it's Bennett Unchained. You were so angry when you started talking about the horrible policies of this nation that has eaten away the inheritance of children to come. Why you went off on the trillions of dollars spent on stupid foreign wars, where our brave men and women fought for this country, but this country made bad mistakes in these long wars. You talked about the money we spent there, and you talked about the first time in American history, common sacrifice every war before that, not just the men and women who were brave enough to go out and fight. You said the first time in American history that we said the only people that are going to bear a burden are the people that are going to go. The rest of you get tax cuts. George Bush, first time ever, we went to war and we gave tax cuts from the Civil War to the Revolutionary War to World War I to World War II. It was a common collective effort. My grandmother talked with pride about victory gardens and pride about war bonds. Everybody pitched in. And so here we are at another crossroads. And is America going to tolerate? Is America going to tolerate this idea that we're going to give extraordinary tax cuts to the overwhelmingly, disproportionately will accrue to the wealthiest amongst us? For what? If I was a mayor, I'd have to answer it. So I appreciate your question, but I also appreciate your moral indignation. I really do. I keep saying over and over again, elevating the voices of Americans on this floor, elevating the point, I hope, that we can't keep doing things like this as business as usual. These are real issues, not of right or left or right or wrong. This is a moral moment in America. And you point out a very clear choice we have when we talk about our tax policy. It should reflect our values. Thank you, sir.
Will the senator yield for a question?
For Jack Reed, I would do just about anything. So I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
First, thank you for continuing to highlight the harm that's being done by the Trump administration on average Americans, working Americans. Flouting the law, withholding federal funds, illegally shutting federal agencies, ruining long-standing alliances, increasing prices, taxes on American consumers. It goes on and on and on. Last week, the Department of Health and Human Services announced that it would fire 20,000 employees. Those cuts appear to be taking shape right now. Is the senator aware that there are reports that thousands of HHS staff have been locked out of their offices this morning?
To answer the senator's question, I've been on the floor since last night. I haven't read any news reports, but when you say that, am I aware of thousands and thousands of HHS employees who've been laid off of their jobs? I'm not aware of it. I'm not surprised. The question isn't, is Donald Trump going to lay more people off? The question isn't, is Donald Trump going to lay more disproportionately veterans off? The question is what are we going to do to stop it when it isn't thoughtful, reasonable cuts, when he talks about the people he's cutting as leeches, demeans and degrades their commitment to service and their noble obligations. We were told that HH&S would be about making America healthy again. And I haven't seen that. I've seen them cut services to give access to children to fresh and healthy foods. I've seen them cut regulations on polluters that make our air quality worse, which hurts people with emphysema, with asthma, with other respiratory diseases. In fact, a lot of the actuarials show more Americans die when polluters are allowed to go back to polluting more. I could go through the things they're doing that are not making our water healthier and safer, not making our air healthier or safer, not making more access to health care that stops and treats chronic disease, not giving access to healthy foods. We're not making America healthy. And so these cuts, they don't surprise me, but they hurt me. They hurt me. These are Americans. These are disproportionately veterans. And I thank you for speaking up for them today.
If the senator would yield for another question.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
President Trump and the Secretary of HHS, Secretary Kennedy, are, as I indicated and made you aware, they are firing a host of people today. But the critical staff functions will be undercut. For example, the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program. And the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, they will focus on worker safety. LIHEAP, as you know, provides essential support to literally keep people warm in the winter and cool in the summer in our southern states. And with LIHEAP undercut like that, there will be effects. People will become unhealthy, in fact, possibly couldn't even pass away and perish. NIOSH, on the other, is an agency that looks after 164 million people in this country so they're safe. And we all know, we all remember back all those stories about the Gilded Age, which sometimes I think the administration wants to bring back, where children labored in shops, where garment workers were killed in fires because there was no way to get out. All the exits were sealed. National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health prevents that. And work-related industries, injuries and illnesses cost our economy about $250 billion annually. So that will double, triple, quadruple. And we're seeing all sorts of reports about the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control at CDC. They do critical work. They're under the gun. We're seeing reports that the director of the FDA Center for Tobacco Products has been fired. We can see that President Trump and Secretary Kennedy would rather stand up for big tobacco than for young kids who get hooked on it and it ruins their health. These are just a few of the cuts. And I want you to, I know you're aware of these, I know you're focused on these. They're going to destroy years of progress. And basically, it's being shouldered by working Americans. You know, nobody who lives in Mar-a-Lago needs LIHEAP heating. Nobody who dines at Mar-a-Lago needs occupational health support. But the waiters do, and the grounds people do. So, Senator, just your comments and thoughts.
I so appreciate the question from my friend. I really think empathy is a superpower, and you are Superman in that category. Because you're thinking about the people affected. We throw these acronyms down here, and they sound like government programs, but you meet with the people. I remember when I was starting out my political career in service in Newark, and I had this dear friend named Kim, and she was one of these people that worked trying to sign people up for LIHEAP. And the stories that would affect her of people that was a lifeline for them to have a little bit of resources to help them get their energy costs in a place where they could afford heat in the winter and some air in the summer. Stories of elders and vulnerable. I don't understand how we can be a nation with so much wealth and abundance and we haven't figured out a way to design a system where when you invest in the well-being of people, people thrive. Kids growing up in quality housing with great public schools, with clean air, without lead in their water, above the poverty line. You know what I love about young people in this country is their resiliency. I meet these beautiful children with light in their eyes, and all they need is a little fertile ground, and they go beyond our imagination in what they can achieve. And so here we are taking our national treasure, the resources being paid into our taxes are our national treasure, and what do we invest in, and what do we do with it? Well, we're running up more debt. We're not going to pay for these tax cuts that are overwhelmingly going to go to the wealthiest. But we're taking all these things that people rely on, from our veterans to our seniors to our disabled to expectant moms. We're just taking as much as we can to defer as much of this gross tax cuts that go disproportionately to the wealthy. And so again, I return to where I've been for closing in on 19 hours. I go back to, what are we going to do about it? It can't be business as usual. There are too many things we've already covered that show that this is a moral moment in America. Where do we stand? It's time, as John Lewis, as I keep repeating, he says it's time to get into good trouble, necessary trouble, to redeem the soul of our nation. And when you're talking about, goes directly to the soul, what do we stand for? Who do we stand for? We should stand for each other. Thank you, sir.
Will the senator from New Jersey yield for a question?
To my dear friend, I yield for a question while retaining the floor, and I thank you for being here. I thank you for your leadership. I thank you for what you stand for, and I look forward to your question.
Well, I so appreciate the senator from New Jersey trying to articulate the urgency of this moment. And I think that I know you've discussed many things in the last, I don't know how many hours it is, but it's been many, many hours. And, you know, we just had a hearing this morning related to the markup of the Social Security nominee. And we're just trying to find out because a whistleblower said that he was involved in helping Doge. And we're here today trying to bring attention to the American public that people are trying to rearrange essential services, contractual obligations, things like Social Security or Medicaid or even Medicare, by basically saying, well, we have this efficiency strategy, when in reality, they're over there with numbers just trying to carve something out of the budget, billions of dollars out of Social Security efficiency, or billions and billions and billions of dollars out of Medicaid, which would really come right out of our hospitals who are saying they don't even think they could stay open. But this notion of Social Security, I don't know if you've heard that not only are they closing offices and cutting jobs, they're asking people to re-register So my constituent, who they basically said was dead, was not dead. He wanted his Social Security. So not only did they not give him his check in January, they tried to claw back checks from the previous months out of his bank account. And even though this has got national press and attention, you would think that everybody on the other side would be like, no, that's not what we're trying to do. Even though the president of the State of the Union said all these people were getting Social Security checks, when my constituent is standing in line with less and less staff trying to get his Social Security, and guess what? They're still at it. As of last Friday, they were still at not giving him his Social Security. So what are we unleashing on America? What are we unleashing that even, and I don't know whether you address these Social Security issues in your statements. I so appreciate you emphasizing the urgency here, because this is the dismantling of contractual agreements between the American people and the people's body that we're here to represent them and stand up for it, and people are acting like they don't care. So you are here in an extraordinary athletic achievement. Thank you. Makes your Stanford days look like nothing, right? You've achieved this great long effort to bring illumination to the American people that they're getting screwed over the fact that these cuts are not some efficient way to deliver better service, but in Social Security, they're undermining Social Security. So have you heard of these cases, the whistleblower issue and others, and do you believe that that's what we should be paying attention to, that before we get a vote on Mr. Bisignano, that we should be finding out what whistleblowers are saying and his involvement related to DOGE and making sure that Social Security checks are protected?
I thank you for the question, my friend and my chairwoman. I did talk about this, but it is so worth repeating. At some point in the night, we covered Social Security, and we read story after story after story of senior citizens that are frightened and afraid that the President of the United States would stand in a joint address and attack Social Security, make fun of it with lie after lie after lie about millions and millions of people getting fraudulent checks, when the people who do the fact-checking and even the Social Security folks themselves say that it's a minuscule amount of people getting checks, and usually it's an overpayment. But that didn't stop there. Elon Musk called it a Ponzi scheme. The richest man in the world and the most powerful man in the world, himself a billionaire, are attacking the program that millions and millions of our senior citizens rely on. I read letters of people that say, don't forget about the people who are disabled who rely on SSI, begging us to remember and speak their names and tell their stories. A lot of fear, a lot of terror, a lot of insecurity. But we spoke about this on the floor, that their benefits are already being cut. What do I mean by that? Well, if you are cutting Social Security offices, as one of our colleagues said from New Hampshire, in a rural area, forcing people to have to drive 100 miles if they have a problem, they can't talk on the phone with the waits on the phones. I read an article from the Wall Street Journal, no left-wing mag, from the Wall Street Journal, talking about how the customer service is going downhill because of the cuts that they're making, and now you're forcing seniors. We read letters from 85-year-olds, 90-year-olds, 93-year-old. They're going to drive 100 miles? I read letters from Social Security workers who now work in inadequate spaces with inadequate staff, unable to do their job that they love. They're not leeches. They're not people that should be demeaned or degraded by the most powerful people in our land. They are public servants who love their jobs and want to serve seniors, but now can't do it because they cut before they thought.
Question, because
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I thank the senator from New Jersey. The issue that I think is not being illuminated enough are the sheer numbers here. In my state of Washington, 1.4 million people on Social Security, 1.8 million people on Medicaid. So you're talking about a big federal relationship. Now, I know that some people in the I actually worked in the private sector. I can tell you one thing about the private sector. The bigger it gets, usually the more inefficient it gets. It just happens. Big organizations can be inefficient. So just because the federal government is the government doesn't mean that Social Security and Medicaid are fraught with fraud. In this case, my constituent's not even getting his check, and no one is responding. And you would think with all this commotion that Social Security would want to jump right on it and fix it, but they're not. And the question I have for the Senator of New Jersey is, in my state, I have, as I said, nearly 1.8 million people who are on Medicaid, and the same problem is now where our colleagues are trying to say they're going to get $880 billion out of the energy and commerce budget of the House of Representatives, when in reality, like 90% of that money is Medicare or Medicaid, and if Medicare is supposedly off the table, then the majority of that is going to come from Medicaid. So in my state, I'm hearing from hospitals that that means they could close. That means essential Medicaid services that are used even in our jails or for fentanyl treatment, or Medicaid that is used as a Obamacare expansion for health care, that so many literally red Republican states, Republican governors have said, we want that. The governor of Idaho, yes, we want that. That's an expansion of Medicaid, and it's successfully working at providing health care to millions of Americans. But now our colleagues are entertaining a notion that they could cut this system. They're not really making it clear. So again, the illumination of you showing the urgency is like a big flag that we're trying to show to the American people. This is not a drill. This is now. This is happening. The beginnings of it are happening. And now this debate that's going to ensue is going to be a massive cut into those programs unless the American people wake up. Now, are your states, and are you hearing this in New Jersey about the Medicaid cuts, the impacts on hospitals, on the delivery system, on essential services?
I cannot emphasize to you strongly enough, we decided to start this whole thing at 7 p.m. last night with Medicaid. And we read story after story after story after story of people who are Medicaid beneficiaries, who are terrified, who are afraid, who didn't say if they cut $880 billion, if they diminish the cuts in any way to their services, they're holding together their lives in this fragile financial equilibrium that one little tug of a transportation service, one little tug of a home health care giver, it all crumbles. They're terrified and afraid. Some of the Americans are dealing with the greatest challenges, not of their own making. Some of them working full-time jobs and getting an injury. It costs extraordinary amounts of chaos to their lives. So yes, I read from the people who are recipients. I read from the people who run hospitals, from rural hospitals to urban hospitals to level 1 trauma centers, who all said that if they cut hundreds of billions of dollars, that it'll affect them. I did something really important. I read from Republican governors and Democratic governors, because I keep saying over and over, America, this is not right or left, it's right or wrong. It's not a partisan moment. It's an American moment. It's a moral moment. I read voices from Republicans specifically, Republican governors in Medicaid expansion states. They have this trigger. You know this, many states, that if the funding from the federal government ever dips below 90%, boom, Medicare expansion is over. Millions of people in financial crisis, in healthcare crisis. What is it going to take for us to say no? With such a firm voice, such a chorus of conviction, thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans, red, white, and blue, every state saying, do not do this for no good reason but to give the majority of your tax cuts to billionaires like Elon Musk. It makes no sense. Who are we as a country? This is not normal times. This is not usual. We should be standing up, because I read the stories of Republicans who run hospitals, Republicans who are governors, who are all saying, don't do this, don't do this. Senator Padilla, I was teasing, I'm not yielding yet, Senator Padilla, I was teasing that man over there named Bennett, that he and I have known each other for years, but you and I have known each other longer. I knew the senator from Washington before I got here, mutual friends. So these are 3 people that were friends of mine before I met this institution. Had Coons here, I have all 4. You, though, I knew longer than Bennett and longer than the great senator from Washington and the chairwoman. We met in 1998, 99, around then. We were both city council people. And the dear friend, a beautiful man who introduced us, told me before we walked in your office that you were a rising star. You were a man of deep decency, that you were going to do extraordinary things in your career, and he did not overstate the fact. You're one of my close friends, and I definitely yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you, and let the record reflect that he said the exact things, same things, probably better things about you, and he was absolutely correct. But I couldn't help but interject right at the moment where I did, because once again, your passion is coming through. There's been, well, first of all, I tremendously admire what you've been doing here on the floor of the Senate today, starting with last night. And as I've been watching off and on, there's these moments where your empathy and your sympathy and your care and concern is coming through. You can't help it. It's who you are. There's been other moments, as you've been talking about some of the key issues and dynamics of this current political climate that we're in, where your passion is coming through, and at times anger. I know it because I've seen it. I know it because we're getting calls in my office about this. I know it because if you monitor comments and commentary on social media about what my colleague is doing here on the Senate floor, some people have asked, why is he so angry? Why, I'd like to say here, right now, that Senator Booker has every right to be angry because of what's going on. I know I'm angry with so much of what's going on, and the American people have every right to be angry with what's going on, because none of what we're seeing come out of the Trump White House is normal. But every day, this approach of flooding the zone with more and more extreme actions runs the risk of making people grow numb to these attacks. And we certainly can't surrender to the feeling of just being overwhelmed by their tactics. And so I want to thank the senior senator from New Jersey for doing what he's doing to shake and awaken the conscience of our country. Now, as I listen to my colleague talk about the real dangers of the Trump administration, what it poses for our nation, I also reflect on what it means for our environment. Because I know it hits home for many folks, but especially in my home state of California. Look, California, many of you have come to visit time and again, is home to some of those beautiful parks and natural wonders in the nation. But if you grew up in Southern California, like I did, you also know there's a flip side to this climate discussion.
Definitely feeling
and we lived through the real costs of climate inaction. Now, growing up, I can tell you not just about the smell of diesel exhaust, which I'll never forget, sitting in a school bus going to and from school, or the regular days where school would be shut down early, we'd all be sent home because of the smog, toxic smog in the air in the greater Southern California area. These were concrete reminders of the real threats that emissions pose to our health. California also knows the dangers posed by extreme weather. We know the droughts, we know the floods, and yes, all too often we've come to know wildfires, devastating wildfires like the ones we experienced in Los Angeles County at the beginning of this year. Now, Senator Booker was kind enough to come visit a few weeks ago to tour Altadena, the epicenter, if you will, of the Eaton fire that devastated so many. And I think we both agree, and anybody who's visited the area to see for themselves would agree, that you cannot see what happened in and around Altadena and come away unmoved. I go on and on with examples and reasons to say to you that this is exactly why California for decades has worked so hard against pollution and against the impacts of climate change. Everything from being aggressive on tailpipe emission standards to our ambitious conservation goals. The 30 and 30 goals set out by the Biden administration were modeled after the 30 by 30 goals set out by the state of California. California is also home to the very first Earth Day, which is now celebrated nationally each and every year. But today, much of our progress is now at risk, because just in the first 2 months of this second Trump administration, we've seen nothing but attacks on this progress of environmental protection. The Trump administration has sought to reverse the endangerment finding, which is the most basic finding of climate science, that yes, greenhouse gases harm public health. They've taken the steps of illegally freezing funding that this Congress had previously appropriated. I'm talking about the types of investments that keep our kids in our communities healthy. Now, earlier this month, the EPA, Trump's EPA, announced that they would be rolling back more than 30 environmental rules. By doing so, they're not just going to make Americans less healthy, they're also going to hurt our economy. And it's going to clear the way for China to become the world leader in green technology. So much for America first, if they continue down that road. But even while the Trump administration has refused to fight climate change, it's one thing to not be helpful. They've actually taken a number of steps that are actually harmful and hurtful, make it harder, for example, for states to respond to natural disasters. They've toyed with tying wildfire disaster assistance to political demands. They've proposed eliminating FEMA. They've implemented federal freezes on things like hazardous fuel removal and the hiring of federal firefighters, things that we need to do in the winter months to prepare for the hot and dry summer months when the risk is greatest. They've even brazenly opened up dams and flooded portions of the Central Valley to pretend President Trump was helping with the Los Angeles wildfires, when the fact is those fires were contained when they released this water that's no longer available in the hot, dry summer months. So they're not just refusing to act or to help, they're making matters worse for states like California and many others. So that's what this fight is about. Our fight for the environment is about America's health and safety. It's about American jobs, and it's about America's future. With all that being said, my question to Senator Booker is this: for the next generation of Americans, for the young people who are tuning in and wondering, well, what is it that I can do? Do I have a voice? Do I have any power? What would you say to them? How can they take action?
I love you for that question, my friend. And I just want to talk about anger, because I've been all over the place. I read these letters and they make me sad. I read these letters, they make me angry. I read these letters, they make me embarrassed that we're a country where people have to rend their pride and beg for help because of the little teeny modicum of support they get from a service like Medicaid. But I've been saying over and over again, as I've tried to learn from my elders, if I've tried to learn from the heroes I revere, that I learned from my parents that anger is not a bad emotion. It's what you do with that emotion that's important. Does it consume you, Does it drive you to hate other people, or do you allow it to fuel you? Because it was ferocious love that had ancestors of all of ours in this country make it through, the insults, no Irish need apply, the injuries of Japanese internments. It's what do you do with those feelings? You're not defined by what happens to you, you're defined by how you choose to respond. So I tell people, anger, if you're not angry, let that fuel you. Well, what about the heartbreak that I feel? Well, I get emotional sometimes because I read a letter and something in it makes me remember somebody I know, or to feel the hurt of constituents begging for help, and it breaks my heart. But I tell you, if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. Because there's so much heartbreak. And if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. Because there's so much heartbreak and fear and pain in a nation where people are seeing their economic hopes and dreams of maybe buying a home or having the money to help their kids with school or to meet their basic needs, where so many Americans are one flat tire, one $400 hit to their account, and they're suddenly doing payday loans or having to struggle to find a way through. There's so much heartbreak in this country. Great love means you make yourself vulnerable to having that heartbreak. But the heart's this powerful tool that even when it's broken, it still beats. And what about people that are afraid? I get afraid sometimes. I think about this legislation, if it goes through, what's going to happen in my state? I know the hospitals. I know the recipients. But you're telling me, look at our history. Is there anybody in American history that you revere that didn't face extraordinarily fear? Because you cannot have great courage without great fear. Fear is a necessary precondition to courage. And so you ask me, my friend, what can people do? I want to remind people, as I've said before on this floor, to remember the truth that I heard before I came here, that change does not come from Washington, it comes to Washington by the people who demand it. I said this earlier, do you think that we got suffrage in this country because a bunch of men on this Senate floor right here put their hands in and said, hey fellas, on the count of three, women get the right of vote, ready, 1, 2, 3, go. No, that's not how it happened. It happened because of Alice Paul. She was a young person from New Jersey. She broke with the course of human events. Alice Paul, one of my greatest heroes, you know what she did? She caused a heck of a lot of good trouble. Necessary trouble. She is the first American ever, young American in her early 20s, the first American ever to protest in front of the White House. She broke with the older, more mature suffrage organizations and went to the White House and did what she called a silent retreat, protest. She held up signs quoting President Woodrow Wilson's own words about freedom and equality and say, aren't they true for me? Like a great black woman would later say, ain't I a woman? Don't I deserve rights? You don't think she was afraid? Let me tell you how afraid she was. Hundreds came out to jeer her, blocking the street, and then they arrested her for obstructing public passage. And then what do you do with a strong, powerful woman? You say that she's crazy, and you throw her in an insane asylum. Before Gandhi, sitting in jail before Gandhi, Alice Paul, this young American from New Jersey, goes on a hunger strike. And they don't honor her hunger strike. They shove tubes down her throat, crack eggs into the tube, force feeding her, and thank God for the First Amendment, which is under attack here in America. The freedom of the press, under attack here in America. Look at the dragging the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg right now for doing what? Getting the highest security officials in the land, just showing them the laws that they were breaking. A journalist covered what Alice Paul did. She gets out of jail because of public outrage. She goes back to protesting in front of the White House, and Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, finally comes out and joins her in supporting suffrage. You don't think she was afraid, angry, heartbroken, but she did something different. She chose a new and unusual pathway to show that this is not the America I believe in. The poetry of Langston Hughes. America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be. The poetry of Langston Hughes. There's a dream in this land with its back against the wall. To save a dream for one, we must save the dream for all. It's what you do with those emotions that matters. Does it call you to greater service? Does it call you to greater sacrifice? Does it call you to greater love? And let me say one more thing. As we were speaking, I just wanted to bring this up. You know I love history. And this is one of my favorite letters, Alex, my colleague, Senator Padilla. It's one of my favorite letters in all of American history because an obscure, unknown American, obscure and unknown, would never have been known, writes a letter to a powerful, powerful man. This obscure American woman that nobody know or would have heard of, ever, if somebody didn't hear about her story and write a book. She would be gone like most of the great heroes in American history, that we don't know their names. It reminded me of the last healthcare debate when Donald Trump tried to take away the ACA, and how many amazing, heroic people who I don't remember their names, but rose up and say, no, 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 that got 3 of my colleagues, McCain, Murkowski, and Collins, to change their vote on this floor and stop healthcare being stripped away from 20 million Americans. Well, here is what I mean. It's not the powerful people with titles and celebrity and offices and billions of dollars that have ever shaped this country. What shapes this nation is hard-working, determined Americans who say, I'm going to redeem the dream of America. I'm going to heal the soul of this country. I'm going to demand that we do better, that we rise higher, that we make change happen. What can you do? That you ask if you're a young person? I love this letter. It's written by Frederick Douglass to an unknown person that would have never been heard of if it wasn't for this book. And he writes to his friend, I'm glad to know that the story of your eventful life has been written by a kind lady, and the same is soon to be published. You ask for what you do not need from me, Frederick Douglass writes. You call upon me for a word of commendation. I need such words from you far more than you could need them from me. He says to this unknown woman, especially where your superior labors and devotion to the cause of the lately enslaved of our land are known as I at least know them. The difference between us is very marked, says the great Frederick Douglass, one of the most known people. He was the most photographed man, period, in the 1800s. The difference between us is very marked, Frederick Douglass says. Most that I have done and suffered in the service of our cause has been in public, and I have received much encouragement at every step of the way. You, on the other hand, he says to this woman, you, on the other hand, have labored in private. I have wrought in the day, you in the night. I have had the applause of the crowd and the satisfaction that comes of being approved by the multitude, while the most you have done has been witnessed by a few trembling, scared, and footsore bondsmen and women whom you have led out of the house of bondage, and whose heartfelt God bless you has been your only reward. The midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witnesses of your devotion to freedom and to heroism, accepting of John Brown of much encouragement Accepting of John Brown of sacred memory, I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people that you have. Much of what you have done would seem improbable to those who do not know you as I know you. It is to me a great pleasure and a great privilege to bear testimony for your character and your works, and to say to those to whom may come that I regard you in every way truthful and trustworthy. He gave his legitimacy to this book project, Frederick Douglass, to then an unknown woman who did the most heroic things. Her name was Harriet Tubman. How did we get here, America, to this privileged place? Well, we got here because of that incredible infrastructure project that this place didn't fund called the Underground Railroad, where black Americans and white Americans broke laws, did civil disobedience to stop slavery. How did we get here? We got here because young 20-somethings got upon a bridge named for a grand wizard of the KKK, named the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We got here because they marched. We got here because they were beaten. We got here because they bled, and I may know one or two of the people on that bridge. I may know one of the two of their names, but I am in this body because of them. How did we get here, America? We got here because of people whose names I don't know, who fought at Seneca Falls. How did we get here? Because of people whose names I don't know, who stood at Stonewall. We got here because of people's names I don't know, who were there at Selma. This is the answer to your question. This is an American moral moment. This is the question of where do we stand for health care? Where do we stand for Social Security? Where do we stand for VA benefits? Where do we stand for our American neighbor when the call and commandment of every faith in our land is to love your neighbor? What is the quality of our love, America? Now is the time to get angry, but let that anger fuel you. Now is your time to get scared for what's happening to your neighbors and let that fear bring about your courage. Now is your time to stare at despair and say you will not have the last word, because I'm going to stand up and at least I can give one person hope in this country. Can I give one person hope in this country? And so what do I want from my fellow Americans? Do better than me. Do better than we in this body. We are flawed and failed people. I see people showing up at our town halls yelling at us, Democrat and Republican, do more. How are you letting this happen? Well, I hate to tell you, we're doing all that I can think of. This is why I'm standing here, to try to give voice to those people. But what is more needed from now is less people sitting on the sidelines, less people being witnesses of American history, and more people determined to make it, to make history, to call to the conscience of this nation, to say, I will not stand for another American to lose their health care for a billionaire. I will not stand for another veteran who's dedicated to stopping the suicide of other veterans to lose their job. I won't stand for the air quality in my community to be made worse because they're letting polluters pollute more. I won't stand for the collective assaults on the Constitution by a man who even the highest judge in our land, a Republican-appointed judge, said, stop threatening and bullying other branches of government. When is it going to be enough? My voice is inadequate. My efforts today are inadequate to stop what they're trying to do. But we, the people, are powerful. We are strong. We have changed history. We have bent the arc of the moral universe. And now is that moral moment again. It's the moral moment again. God bless America. We need you now. God bless America. If you love her, if you love your neighbor, if you love this country, show your love. Stop them from doing what they're trying to do. For almost 20 hours, we have laid out what they're trying to do. 20 hours. I want to stand more, and I will, but I'm begging people, don't let this be another normal day in America. Please, God, don't let them take Medicaid away from 10, 20, 30, or 40 million Americans who desperately need it. Don't let them do it. I will yield to my dear friend who I owe an apology. At the last hours of your birthday, as I was preparing for this, I realized that we have a special bond. Before I yield, I want to tell this guy.
The senator was discussing.
Hold on. I yield, but I retain the right to the floor. So I yield, but I retain the right to the floor.
I want to ask some questions about veterans in this country, but before I do so, you talked a lot about courage.
Yes, sir.
And how the world has been changed by people of courage. And I look down at my tie that I have on today.
Yes.
Which has the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And we think of that as a sacred document, an important document in our history, but these people had the courage to put their lives on the line for a radical idea, that people could govern themselves and that we could be independent of a monarch.
and they were putting their lives on the line. That's courage, and I'm afraid we have people around here, Senator, who won't put their jobs on the line for the idea of America, for our Constitution, for the guarantees that are provided in the Constitution, for the First Amendment, for the structure of the Constitution, for the independence and separation of powers, which is what provides the protection, the essential protection for our freedoms. But let me ask a question about veterans. We had a hearing this morning in the Veterans Affairs Committee. We were hearing nominees. And I commented that here we are mostly voting on nominees in this extraordinary, historic time as if everything is normal. What I said in the committee this morning was, we're playing Nearer My God to Thee on the deck of the Titanic. And we're talking about all these nominees and all these votes that we're having and not talking about what's happening to our country. And in terms of veterans, here's what's happening. Number one, every time the guy with the chainsaw takes so much pleasure in firing people, if you hear about 1,000 people fired in this government, chances are over 300 of them are veterans. 30% of the federal workforce are veterans. In the VA, I suspect it's even a higher number. So what's happening in the Veterans Administration? The first thing that happened was a hiring freeze. And the hiring freeze affected everybody in the Veterans Administration until somebody said, well, wait a minute, what about doctors and nurses? What about direct care workers? And they said, oh, wait a minute, we didn't mean for that. And that's sort of symbolic of the way this thing is going, because they're not thinking. It's ready, fire, aim, time after time. And so you have a hiring freeze. Then they say, oh, well, wait a minute, there's this group we want to do. But then they leave the hiring freeze in place for the people that are working behind the scenes. I think the senator will agree that if nobody's there to answer the phone when a veteran calls to make a claim or make an appointment, that's a denial of benefits, just as if they've cut the benefits. Okay, so 2,400 people fired. And by the way, those people being fired are getting emails that say you're being fired for poor performance. There was no analysis of performance. There was no examination of how they were actually doing or what these people were contributing. It was random. It was people who were on probation. You know why? Because they're easier to fire under our laws. So we've got people being fired ostensibly for poor performance. Think of that as somebody who's put their life on the line for their country because they're a veteran, and then they go to work in public service for the Veterans Administration, and they're being told poor performance, when everybody knows that's a shame. So the next thing that happens is the Veterans Administration announces they're going to fire 83,000 people over the next 6 months. Now, they say, we're going to return to the size of the Veterans Administration it was in 2019. Number one, that's an arbitrary number. Why not 2020 or 2016? It's an arbitrary number. It's not based on any analysis or deep thought. Here's the problem, Senator, and I want you to be ready to respond to this. Here's the problem. There have been 7 major pieces of legislation benefiting veterans since 2019, the biggest of which, of course, is the PACT Act, the largest expansion of veterans benefit program in probably the last 30 or 40 years. And you need people to administer that program. And instead, they're firing people. And the Secretary of the Veterans Administration says, don't worry, it's not going to affect services at all. I don't think that statement passes the straight face test. And then we have a statement from the VA that says, very proudly, we've canceled 600 contracts, but they won't tell us what they are. I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee. We don't know what they are. We don't know what the plan is for those 83,000 people that are going to be fired. And I guess my question is, what do you think of an organization that says to a veteran, thank you for your service, you're fired?
Well, as we were talking earlier, the firings are adding up. It's going to be now about 80,000 people from the VA alone A disproportionate number of them are veterans, and so that is a rollback in service. We already know that veterans in all of the government agencies represent about 24% of the government workers we're talking about that are getting fired. And these are veterans, as I read their stories, that just want to keep serving their country, from the national parks to serving their fellow veterans and helping them get health care. And we are seeing people that get exemplary reviews, and then they're fired as probationary workers under the only way they can, according to the law, is to say that they're a bad federal worker. And then they get insult on top of it when the highest or the most powerful man in the world and the richest man in the world, Trump and Musk, come together and call the guy making $45,000 serving other veterans, they call him a leech, they call him a parasite. And so I hear what you're saying. Like, these are folks that I read their stories. They did things that few Americans would do. They went overseas and served in combat. We had one of our dear friends here who lost her legs in combat, but she stands taller than most all the people in this body. These are the people that are so ingrained in their bodies and minds and souls to serve America, to love America. This president calls somebody like John McCain a sucker. The guy who drafted dodged the draft. And so I hear what you're saying, and one of the things you're just saying is it makes no sense. Nobody came to the Veterans Committee in the Senate who actually approves the resources, establishes the agencies, and should have the say, according to this document, this vaunted, sacred, civically sacred text, our Constitution. And so, what are you to say to them if you don't even know what the plan is? You can't even explain to us what's your plan to making the VA system more efficient. Now, here's the other thing. We passed in this body some of my favorite senators, like John Tester, who I miss so much. Maybe I even just miss bumping into the guy, because he was the only person in the Senate that let me run from one hallway all the way and hit him. I used to joke that it was this test to see what happens when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. He is a void in this place, but he stood for that PACT Act, gave some of those fiery speeches, and finally we got that bill passed. And we had to add tens of thousands of jobs because of the increased hundreds of thousands of people that were affected from these burn pits or from other challenges. And now we're cutting back 83,000 employees? Patty Murray came down here and said something that affected me in my first weeks as a senator when I, in New Jersey, sat down with women veterans, and they told me how long they had to wait for gynecological care. And so what is this administration doing in its 83,000 cuts? They're going to improve services to our female veterans? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Show me I'm wrong. Because we have an Article I duty, oversight, checks and balances. Are we doing that right now? One of the worst things I've seen happen in national security, and by the way, there are national security screw-ups on both parties. Nobody has a monopoly on this. Let's not be overly partisan here. But weeks ago, who are supposed to be the pros and set the example, our national security leadership was using a commercial app to communicate classified documents, and they had it on disappearing messages, so they're violating a law of the land called the Preserving Public Records Act. Now, I've heard from Republicans and Democrats this is outrageous, there should be an investigation. We should be asking common sense questions. Was this a pattern and practice of communication? How many other things that are classified have you been communicating about? There's a lot of really important questions that they should have to answer to. But where are the hearings, folks? I just wonder why this body is shrinking from the articulated duties that we all raised our hands and said we would defend and preserve this Constitution and what it says we should do, what it says our jobs should do. But you're a senator, I'm a senator, I can't tell you what the cut VA plan is. I can't tell you it. They haven't come in here and told us. Are we doing our job? I can't tell you, are we preserving and fighting for national security after one of the biggest national security scandals I've seen since I've been here? They don't have a providence in a partisan way, but they should answer for it. Are we doing our constitutional duty? What about the administration that is ending the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, ending that agency, ending the Department of Education. Do they have the right to do that according to this document? No. Are we saying, hey, we're going to stand up for the people and preserve this document? No. Thank God for the Article 3 branch of government, because they're being dragged into court, and Republican appointed judges and Democratic appointed judges are saying, can't do it. But you know what Trump is doing? He's ignoring the courts, and then he's demonizing the judges. You know that threats on judges in America, the threats have gone up 400%. You know that I had a federal judge, God bless her, where somebody thought they were going to her house. They did, but she wasn't home, and they murdered her son and shot her husband. And Trump is out there threatening judges, dragging them on Twitter or X or whatever he's calling it now. This is America. I know people on both sides of the aisle, we believe in common decency. We believe in respect. We believe that the highest office in the land should represent the best of our values, not the worst, not a guy that we wouldn't even let babysit our kids. And so I don't know what's going on with veterans, but I'm not going to sit by and do nothing. That's why I'm standing here. That's why I read the voices of so many veterans. Let's elevate the voices of the Americans who are being hurt and harmed. Let's talk for them if they can't talk for themselves. Let's tell them that we see you, we love you, and that all of us, we're going to fight for you.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
From you, my friend, who doubled the number of vegans in the Senate. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.